Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
All right, welcome back to Battles of the American Civil War with your host Bang and Dang. And we got a special YouTube only, YouTube exclusive for you guys where we're putting together the whole Gettysburg campaign from beginning to end, from the first battle to the last battle, starting with the Battle of Franklin's Crossing and ending with the retreat from Gettysburg by the Confederates and the last battle of this campaign at Manassas Gap. This is the first time we've done something like this. We put the campaigns together all in one. Usually when we were doing the battles, we were going in chronological order, so all the campaign battles weren't together. But figured if we're going to start with it and put out a whole campaign together in one video, we'll do the Gettysburg campaign first. You'll notice some of these, like I said, they're from different episodes that have different battles from different campaigns, so some of them might sound a little bit different. Some of these were recorded probably about 4 years ago when we first started this podcast, so yeah, some of them may sound different, but either or, we'll start with Franklin's Crossing and head our way to, obviously, the big Battle of Gettysburg, and then the retreat, and ending with Manassas Gap. So, hope you guys enjoy it. We plan on doing this with pretty much all the campaigns that we can, putting them all together in one video like this. Like I said, this is YouTube exclusive, so if you're listening to this, you like it, go check out the actual podcast. And subscribe if you haven't already to get more Civil War content. So, here we go. All right, coming up first in this Gettysburg campaign, the turning point of the war. This campaign's about to start, and all hell's about to break loose as soon as we get to Gettysburg, but first we got to get there. So, kicking off the campaign is the Battle of Franklin's Crossing, June 5th, 1863, also known as Deep Run, which took place near Fredericksburg, Virginia. June 3rd, Robert E. Lee, he decided to begin his second invasion of northern soil, and accordingly ordered his army to withdraw the lines around Fredericksburg and move into the Shenandoah Valley. To cover the withdrawal, Lee, he left A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps. He left him with orders to remain along the lines until the army was safely away. Word of Lee's movements, they reached Union General Joseph Hooker almost immediately. To determine the validity of the various reports he was receiving, at 7 a.m., June 5th, Major General Daniel Butterfield, he ordered the 6th Corps under John Sedgwick to prepare to lay bridges across the Rappahannock River at Franklin's Crossing, which was the Army of the Potomac's third attempt to do so within 6 months. By 5 p.m., June 5th, nearly all batteries of the 6th Corps had moved to the Falmouth Heights and started shelling Confederates in trench and rifle pits on the southern bank. In the morning of June 6th, Sedgwick, he ordered the 2nd Division under Brigadier General Albion Howe to make reconnaissance in force. As the 26th New Jersey and 5th Vermont regiments led the attack, Howe, he realized they risked significant losses and directed Colonel Lewis Grant to cross the river in pontoon boats. The Vermonters, they were able to successfully land the boats on the southern bank and overrun the Florida troops, capturing 35 prisoners. They had then advanced up the bank to the edge of woods, where they encountered a strong detachment of Confederates supported by artillery. A hot firefight ensued that was described as severe at times before the Union advance was halted and driven back across the river, suffering 57 casualties. And when the Federals failed to attack again, Hill, he withdrew the following day to rejoin the army. By successfully defeating the Union reconnaissance party, A.P. Hill convinced Sedgwick that Lee still held Fredericksburg in force. Accordingly, Hooker, he remained along the Rappahannock, giving Lee a valuable head start on his invasion, always. However, Hooker remained unsure of Lee's true position and intentions, and accordingly ordered a reconnaissance by his cavalry. Learning that the majority of Lee's army was in Culpeper County, Virginia, Hooker, he ordered Brigadier General Alfred Pleasanton's cavalry to attack, which resulted in the next battle coming up, the Battle of Brandy Station, June 9th. It's going to bring us to the Battle of Brandy Station, taking place on June 9th. Around Brandy Station, Virginia. The Battle of Brandy Station was the largest predominantly cavalry engagement of the war, as well as the largest ever to take place on American soil.
no shit.
A bunch of cavalry and horses running all over the damn place.
Dude, there's freaking Braveheart up in this bitch.
Yeah.
I've never seen Braveheart.
Me neither. This is the beginning of the Gettysburg campaign as well, so now we're mixing up Gettysburg and Vicksburg all right here, baby. Man, what a month we got going on here. with the Union Cavalry under Major General Alfred Pleasanton against that good old Jeb Stuart.
Good old Jeb.
If I remember correctly, when putting this together, Jeb doesn't fare too well right here.
Jeb, he has a rough one at some point in war. I think it is.
We already did, remember? The one we did a few weeks ago, it was the first defeat of Confederate cavalry.
Yeah, I think he's realizing that they're screwed.
Maybe. Well, this Confederate Army of the Northern Virginia streamed into Culpeper County, Virginia after its victory at Chancellorsville just a couple of weeks ago. Under the leadership of Robert E. Lee, the troops massed around Culpeper, preparing to carry the war north into Pennsylvania, which they will. The Confederate Army was suffering from hunger, and their equipment was poor, though.
Yeah,
they got a big problem right here, man.
Lee was having some hard times here, and he just happened to... I don't think... Is he the head guy? He's not even the head guy yet.
I think Johnson still is.
Right.
Lee's just the commander of all the Virginia armies.
Right. And now it's 3 years into this war. And the Confederate side didn't even start off with...
technically 2 years, but...
2.5.
Not even.
And the Confederate side didn't even barely have enough shit to do now, back then, than they do now.
Look at the last battle at Port Hudson. They're eating rats.
Right. Didn't have the right guns. Most of them had muskets instead of rifles.
Yep. That's what happens when you fight an industrial nation.
Right, and then that industrial nation takes the biggest river, waterway, inland waterway away from you. Lee was determined to strike north to capture horses, equipment, and food for his men.
Yeah, you got to do something there, Lee.
Find all the rats you can. Let's go. His army could also threaten Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington.
Yep.
And encourage the growing peace movement into the north. That's a peace movement. By June 5th, 2 infantry corps under Lieutenant James Longstreet and Richard Ewell. Hey, we haven't heard these guys.
A couple of episodes ago.
They were camped
Chancellorsville.
They were camped in and around Culpeper.
Right.
6 miles northeast of Culpeper, holding the line of Rappahannock River. Stuart camped his cavalry troopers, screening the Confederate army against surprise by the enemy. Most of the Southern cavalry was camped near Brandy Station. Stuart, befitting his reputation as a dashing cavalier or a beau sabois, he requested a full field review of his troops by General Lee. This grand review on the 5th of June included nearly 9,000 mounted troopers, 4 batteries of horse artillery, charging in simulated battle at the Inlet Station, about 2 miles southwest. They're charging. And they had electric horses back then? What the hell?
They did a battle reenactment, pretty much.
Right. They did that about 2 miles southwest of Brandy Station. The review field currently remains much as it was in 1863, except that a Virginia police station occupies part of it.
Good for them, huh?
I want to see that.
Well, General Lee, he was not able to attend the review, however, so it was repeated in his presence on June 8th, although the repeated performance was limited to a simple parade without battle simulations. So it wasn't repeated.
So you lied.
Right. Despite the lower level of activity, some of the cavalrymen and the newspaper reporters at the scene complained that all Stuart was doing was feeding his ego and exhausting the horses.
Right.
Lee ordered Stuart to cross the Rappahannock the next day and raid Union forward positions, screening the Confederate Army from observation or interferences as it moved north. Anticipating this imminent offensive action, Stuart ordered his tired troopers back into camp around Brandy Station.
So stupid.
Yeah.
So dumb. Around Brandy Station, Stuart's force of about 9,500 men consisted of 5 cavalry brigades, commanded by Brigadier General Wade Hampton, WHF Rooney Lee, Beverly H. Robertson, wow, William E. Grumble Jones, and Colonel Thomas T. Munford. The commanding Brigadier General Fitzhugh Lee's brigade, with Lee, was stricken with a bout of rheumatism.
Like rheumatoid arthritis?
Something like that. So these guys are out.
Right.
Plus the 6th Battery Stuart Horse Artillery, commanded by Major Robert F. Beckham. They were out as well. That's Syed.
Out? How were they out?
Oh, no, they were in.
Right. And the other one wasn't out, just Fitzhugh Lee was.
Right. Unknown to the Confederates, 11,000 Union men had massed on the other side of the Rappahannock.
How do you not know?
Major General Alfred Pleasanton, commanding the Cavalry Corps of the Army of the Potomac, had organized his combined armed forces into 2 wings under Brigadier Generals John Buford and David McMurtry Gregg. David Gregg McMurtry, how about that?
Well, no.
This was augmented by infantry brigades from the 5th Corps.
All right, well, Buford's wing, accompanied by Pleasanton, consisted of his own 1st Cavalry Division, a reserve brigade led by Major Charles Whiting, and an infantry brigade of 3,000 men under Brigadier General Adalbert Ames.
Dude, these guys came stacked.
Greg's wing was the 2nd Cavalry Division led by Colonel Alfred Duffy, the 3rd Cavalry Division led by Gregg, and an infantry brigade under Brigadier General David Russell.
Fantastic.
The commander of the Army of the Potomac, Major General Joseph Hooker, interpreted the enemy's cavalry presence around Culpeper to be indicative of preparations for a raid of his army's supply lines. So they're coming for our supplies, dude. In reaction to this, he ordered Pleasanton's force on a spoiling raid to disperse and destroy the Confederates. Pleasanton's attack plan called for a 2-pronged thrust at the enemy.
Buford's wing would cross the river.
This is the first time we're hearing of Pleasanton.
Right. Buford's wing would cross the river at Beverly's Ford, 2 miles northeast of Brandy Station. At that very same time, Gregg's men would cross at Kelly's Ford, 6 miles downstream to the southeast. Pleasanton anticipated that the Southern cavalry would be caught in a double envelopment. Surprised, outnumbered, and beaten. He was, however, unaware of the precise disposition of the enemy. Both sides didn't even know.
Right.
And he incorrectly assumed that his force was substantially larger than the Confederates he
Only
faced.
about 11 or 1,500
How many times have we heard that before?
Always about 4:30 a.m. June 9th.
They're like within 5 miles from each other. And you're telling me you can't send somebody out and check it out?
4:30 a.m. June 9th, Buford's column crossed the Rappahannock River in a dense fog, pushing aside the Confederate pickets at Beverly's Ford. Pleasanton's force had achieved its first major surprise of the day. Jones's brigade, awakened by the sound of nearby gunfire, rode to the scene partially dressed and often riding bareback. Would he just take his shirt off multiple times?
Right.
Often riding bareback. They struck Buford's leading brigade, commanded by Colonel Benjamin Davis, near a bend in the Beverly's Ford Road, and temporarily checked its progress, and Davis was killed in the ensuing fighting.
Oh, no.
Davis's brigade had been stopped just short of where Stuart's horse artillery was camped and was vulnerable to capture. Cannoneers swung 1 or 2 guns into position and fired down the road at Buford's men, enabling the other pieces to escape and establish the foundation for the subsequent Confederate line. The artillery unlimbered on 2 knolls that were on either side of the Beverly's Ford Road.
Oh, shit. Most of Jones's command rallied to the left of this Confederate artillery line, while Hampton's brigade formed to the right. The 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry, led by Major Robert Morris, Jr., unsuccessfully charged the guns at St. James Church, suffering the greatest casualties of any regiment in the battle. Several Confederates later described the sixth charge. Several Confederates later described the Pennsylvania 6th charge as the most brilliant and glorious cavalry charge of the war. Well, look at Confederates giving them love.
Even though they suffered greatest casualties of the regiment.
Right. In many Civil War battles, cavalrymen typically dismounted once they reached an engagement and fought essentially as infantry.
Right.
But in this battle, the surprise and chaos led mostly mounted fight.
Damn, that would have been nice, huh?
Buford tried to turn the Confederate left and dislodge the artillery that was blocking the direct route to Brandy Station. However, Rooney Lee's brigade stood in his way, with some troops on Yew Ridge and some dismounted troops positioned alongside a stone wall in the front.
Damn stone walls, man. After sustaining heavy losses, the Federals displaced the Confederates from the stone wall. Then, to the amazement of Buford's men, the Confederates began pulling back.
That happens all the time.
Right. They were reacting to the arrival of Gregg's Union Cavalry Division, about 2,800 men, which was the second major surprise of the day. Gregg had intended to cross at Kelly's Ford at dawn, in concert with Buford's at Beverly's, but assembling the men from dispersed locations and Duffy's division getting lost on the way cost them 2 hours. So, we got to go here. They had intended to proceed on the roads leading directly into Brandy Station, but discovered the way blocked by Robertson's brigade of the Confederates. Gregg found a more circuitous route that was completely unguarded, and following these roads, his lead brigade under Colonel Percy Wyndham arrived in Brandy Station about 11 a.m.
Between Gregg and the St. James battle was a prominent ridge called Fleetwood Hill, which had been Stuart's headquarters the previous night.
Fleetwood.
Oh, Jeb Stuart and most of his staff had departed for the front by this time. The only force on Fleetwood Mac when Gregg arrived was howitzer. Left in the rear because of inadequate ammo. I mean, that's
was a howitzer, not howitzer.
Right. Was a howitzer. It was left behind. That's usually what happened, man. They ran out of shit. They're like, why do we need to carry that with us? We don't have nothing to shoot it with. Shoot with it. Major Henry McClellan, Stuart's adjutant, called Lieutenant John Carter and his gun crew of Captain Robert Chew's battery to ascend to the crest of the hill and go into action with the few shells available. as he sent an urgent request to Stuart for reinforcements. Carter's few shots delayed the Union advance as they sent out skirmishers and returned cannon fire. When windmen of the North's men charged up to the western slope of the Fleetwood Mac and near the crest, the lead elements of Jones' brigade, which had just withdrawn from St. James Church, rode over the crown.
I don't understand what you just said. Paragraph.
I'm like, what is going on here?
Gregg's next brigade, led by Colonel Judson Kilpatrick, swung around east of Brandy Station and attacked up southern end and the eastern slope of Fleetwood Hill, only to discover that their appearance coincided with the arrival of Hampton's brigade. A series of confusing charges and countercharges swept back and forth across the hill. The Confederates cleared the hill for the final time, capturing 3 guns and inflicting 30 casualties among the 36 men, holy shit, of the 6th New York Light Artillery, which had attempted to give close-range support to the Federal cavalry. Colonel Duffy's small 1,200-man division was delayed by 2 Confederate regiments in the vicinity of Stevensburg and arrived on the field too late to effect the action.
Cool. While Jones and Hampton withdrew from their initial positions to fight at Fleetwood Hill Mac, Rooney Lee continued to confront Buford, falling back to the northern end of the hill. Reinforced by Fitzhugh Lee's brigade, Rooney Lee launched a counterattack against Buford at the same time as Pleasanton had called for a general withdrawal near sunset, and the 10-hour battle was over. So there's like, you attack, and we're like, we're just going to withdraw, and so they didn't even know it. We're like, yeah, we ran them off, and we're like, no.
Is that what happened?
High in morale high, right? They think they did something good.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, Union casualties were 907, 69 killed, 352 wounded, 486 missing, which were all primarily captured. Confederate losses totaled 523. Some 20,500 men were engaged in this, which was the largest predominantly cavalry battle to take place during the war, like we said.
It's ridiculous.
Among the casualties was Robert E. Lee's son, Rooney, who was seriously wounded in the thigh. He was sent to the Hickory Hill in a state near Hanover Courthouse, where he was captured on June 26th.
Oh, shit.
He didn't die, though. Stuart argued that the battle was a Confederate victory since he held the field at the end of the day, and he had repelled Pleasanton's attack. The Southern press was generally negative about this outcome.
I mean, he was right. They didn't advance.
He didn't get the job done either.
Right, it's true. The Richmond Enquirer wrote, General Stuart has suffered no little in public estimation by the late enterprises of the enemy. Damn. That's harsh. Whatever.
Right.
The Richmond Examiner described Stuart's command as puffed up cavalry.
Oh, damn, dude. They're not liking Jeb right now.
And that suffered the consequences of negligence and bad management.
Oh.
Subordinate officers criticized Pleasanton from the north for not aggressively defeating Stuart at Brady Station. Oh, shit. Now we're going.
Brandy Station?
Major General Hooker had ordered Pleasanton to disperse and destroy the Confederate cavalry near Culpeper, but Pleasanton claimed that he had only been ordered to make a reconnaissance and force toward Culpeper. He was like, dude, I'm just supposed to check shit out. For the first time in the Civil War, Union cavalry matched the Confederate horsemen in skill and determination.
Well, not true.
Stuart falling victim to 2 surprise attacks, which cavalry was supposed to prevent.
Right.
Foreshadowed.
Right, you're cavalry. You're not supposed to get surprised.
Right. And this also foreshadowed other embarrassments ahead of him in the Gettysburg campaign. Oh, dude. Yeah, Stuart, he funked up in Gettysburg, but it was a bad time for him to be in a slump.
Right.
This is not when I need you to hit over 75 and 15 strikeouts, bud.
All right. The Brandy Station Foundation, the BSF, was formed to protect the Brandy Station battlefield from development. According to Clark B. Hall, a small group of citizens came together over coffee in a little home situated just south of the Rappahannock River in eastern Culpeper County, Virginia. Okay. Over time, the organization grew to over 400 members, has been the cornerstone of efforts to save the battlefield from attempts to turn it into an office park and a racetrack, as well as preserving the historic building known as Graffiti House. Yeah, the Graffiti House. Remember that one? Where the all the Confederates put their names and shit on it?
Very true.
In 1990, the National Park Service completed mapping of historic resources at Brandy Station and recommended preservation of 1,262 acres at 4 separate engagement areas.
American Battlefield Trust, formerly known as the Civil War Trust, has been the major preservation organization involved at the Brandy Station.
I would assume so.
The trust, supplemented by the BSF and other partners, has acquired and preserved 2,159 acres of the battlefield and more than 15 separate acquisitions from 1997 through 2021. In 2003, this led to the opening of the Brandy Station Battlefield Park, which interprets the history of the site. Oh, that's nice. Like here, something happened with some people.
All right, some things.
Some things happen to some people. This work has prevented some racists fought racists. This work has prevented a number.
How many times are you going to start the same damn sentence over again?
I had that one, but you interrupted me. So now I got to do it again. This work.
I don't think you're.
This work has prevented a number of commercial enterprise from infringing on the battleground. Nice. Including a proposed Formula One racetrack in the late 1990s.
See, Formula One?
I would have built that shit.
At least find another site.
Right.
Yeah, they did. I don't know.
In 2013, the trust achieved a major preservation success by purchasing a 61-acre tract at Fleetwood Hill, Mac, site of the number of significant cavalry charges during the battle. Of a number, not just one.
Obviously.
2022, Virginia agreed to accept 1,700 acres of the trust and purchase up to 800 additional acres to form the Culpeper's Battlefield State Park.
Nice.
The park is scheduled to open July 1st, 2024.
Nice.
That's if we're still here.
Well,
The Second Battle of Winchester fought between June 13th and 15th, 1863 in Frederick County and Winchester, Virginia, as part of the Gettysburg Campaign. After the Battle of Brandy Station on the 9th of June, 1863.
I guess Brandy Station probably was at Gettysburg, wasn't it?
General Lee ordered Ewell's 19,000-man Second Corps Army of Northern Virginia to clear the lower Shenandoah Valley of Union opposition so that Lee's army could proceed on its invasion of Pennsylvania.
Yep.
Shielded by the Blue Ridge Mountains from Union interference.
Those very same Blue Ridge Mountains that he surrenders in?
Crazy. Union General-in-Chief Henry Wager Halleck expressed great concerns about the Middle Department's defensive strategy for its primary objective of protecting the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. I mean, you got to protect the railroad, right?
Especially a corridor.
All right. Brigadier General Benjamin Franklin Kelly, commander of the Railroad Division, Department of Harper's Ferry, had been advised that his plan, along with Major General Milroy's and Major General Robert Schnack's, commander of the Middle Department, was unsound, supposedly. Headquarters 8th Army Corps, Baltimore, January 5th, 1863. The following telegrams received today from Major General Halleck, General-in-Chief. It states, Major General Schnack. No
Shank.
attempt. Shank. Yeah, Shank. No attempt should be made to hold Winchester against a large force of the enemy. ... He knows, right? General Halleck does not quite agree with General Shank and yourself as to policy of covering and protecting the road principally by keeping up advanced post at Leesburg, Winchester, and Romney. W.M.D. Whipple, Assistant Adjutant General. Oh my.
Adjutant? Right?
Adjutant General.
Lieutenant General Richard Ewell's force of 19,000 men consisted of the division of Major General Jubal Early, with the brigades of Brigadier Generals Harry T. Hayes, William Extra Billy Smith,
Extra Billy?
Yeah, Extra Billy, John B. Gordon, and Isaac E. Avery. The division of Major General Robert E. Rhodes, with the brigades of Brigadier Generals Junius Daniel, George P. Doles, Alfred Iverson, Stephen Dotson Ramsor, and Colonel Edward O'Neill. Ed O'Neill, hey.
It's probably Stephen.
Right. The division of Major General Edward Allegheny Johnson, with the brigades of Brigadier Generals George H. Stewart, James A. Walker of the Stonewall Brigade, John M. Jones, and Colonel Jesse M. Williams for Nichols Brigade. The unattached 1st Maryland Battalion, the Cavalry Brigade of Brigadier General Albert G. Jenkins, and the Corps Artillery Reserve under Colonel J. Thompson Brown.
Fantastic. Well, the Union side, 2nd Division, 8th Corps, Middle Department, Major General Robert Milroy's force of 6,900 consisted of 3 infantry brigades under Brigadier General Washington L. Elliott and Colonels Andrew McReynolds and William Ely, and 2 small outposts northwest of town under Colonel Joseph W. Kiefer. Army of Northern Virginia.
No, you shouldn't read that.
Ewell's movements were coordinated as part of an overall orchestration of the Army of Northern Virginia into position for crossing the Potomac toward Pennsylvania by using the Blue Ridge Mountains as a screen.
Right.
Same thing Lee wanted to do.
This says Lee.
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry, guys. Sorry.
And he commands the Army of Northern Virginia.
Right. This strategic offensive maneuver was put into effect on the 3rd of June, 1863. when Robert E. Lee stated his intent to transfer the scene of hostilities beyond the Potomac.
He's like, I'm tired of fighting in our own damn yard. We got to take it to them now.
Right. And he's like, we're going to move in a concealed fashion down in the Shenandoah Valley. Well, you got General Longstreet's First Corps via Snickers Gap and Hill's Third Corps via Ashby's Gap, paralleled the movements of the Second Corps to the east through Berryville, Virginia. Then you had Stuart's Cavalry Division was under orders for careful synchronization and screening for Lee's army by conducting demonstrations and screening actions along the A&V's right flank east of the Blue Ridge. You should have been doing this down in Louisiana.
Right. Well, from June 4th to 11th, the Second Corps left Hamilton's Crossing on June 4th and marched to Culpeper, Virginia, arriving on June 7th.
That's the Confederate.
Right. The receiving intelligence that Union forces, I could have just read that, they would have known. Receiving intelligence that Union forces had crossed the Rappahannock River in force, Lee ordered Ewell northeast to Brandy Station, Virginia on June 9th to support Major General Jeb Stuart's action in the Battle of Brandy Station, which we've done already, I believe, only to find that the Union forces already were retreating.
Oh, wow.
Ewell resumed the march on June 10th, and on June 11th, Early and Johnson's divisions marched via the Sperryville Turnpike to Gaines Crossroads, while Rhodes's division took the Richmond Road towards Flint Hill. On the evening of the 11th, after consulting with General Lee, Ewell met with Early, Johnson, and the Second Corps topographer Jedediah Hotchkiss to discuss approach routes and a general plan for the Second Corps' objective to capture Winchester and Martinsburg.
These guys can be like, all right, we got to do this shit. Seriously.
June 12th, Second Corps passed through Chester's Gap southeast of Front Royal, Virginia, approaching along the Front Royal Pike, which is modern US 522. There, the Second Corps was joined by its cavalry brigade under the command of Brigadier General Albert Jenkins, and Ewell consulted with Early and Jenkins to form his corps-level plan of action, composed of splitting the corps into two basic independent movements, which the North would intercept and cut off maneuver to Berryville and Martinsburg.
All right.
Units in that was going to be Rhodes's division and Jenkins' cavalry brigade, and they were going to move north through Berryville, Virginia to Martinsburg, West Virginia.
Right.
The objective was to capture, if possible, McReynolds' force of 1,800 men stationed at Berryville, and then to press north to Martinsburg.
Yep, got to keep it going north.
The main strike maneuver to Winchester was Early's division, Johnson's division, and the 16th Virginia Cavalry Battalion of Jenkins' brigade. They were going to move northwest to Winchester, Virginia.
Look at that.
And the objective was to attack the fortifications in Winchester and Milroy's force of 6,000 to 8,000 men.
Ooh, they're looking for a battle.
Yeah, by the end of the day on June 12th, Rhodes' division was 5 miles north of Front Royal, encamped at Stone Bridge, while Johnson's division arrived at Cedarville, and Early's division was encamped near the Shenandoah River.
I mean, they got a nice little plan there.
About to take it.
By April, 4 months into his occupation of Winchester, Milroy's loose grip on Confederate raiding in the lower Shenandoah Valley caused enough concern for the Middle Department commander, Schenck, to directly order Milroy to post one brigade further to the east at Berryville. It was like, dude, come on. All this progress was made, and you're just ready to just give it up.
All right.
Well, this move offered a base of operations to patrol crossings at the Shenandoah River and look out for Confederates raiding in and out of both Snickers Gap and Ashby's Gap in the Blue Ridge Mountains on the eastern border of the valley. If he didn't do that, they wouldn't even known.
Right.
It's good called by Schenck. Lee was counting on Milroy to be a lazy prick. He's just letting us do this shit.
He was, look out for raiders on Snickers Gap and Ashby's Gap. That's where both of them were going.
Right.
Nice.
In response, Milroy posted McReynolds' brigade in Berryville with orders to evacuate to Winchester upon the signal of the firing of one of the heavy artillery guns.
All right. Well, Milroy stationed pickets and vedettes around Winchester, but they were positioned too close to Winchester due to bushwhacking of his patrols.
Right.
Therefore, Milroy had practically no surveillance of the situation around himself. His caution in posting outlying vedettes was perhaps due to the severe losses he incurred in trying to suppress various Confederate cavalry raids that kept occurring in his district, such as on the 26th of February, when he sent the 1st New York Cavalry and the 13th Pennsylvania Cavalry out to pursue raiders. They met the 7th and 11th Virginia Cavalry under the command of Colonel O.R. Funston and suffered a devastating loss of 197 Federal cavalry, including 12 officers.
The Union had nothing on the Confederate cavalry.
Cavalry sucks, man.
Oh my goodness. if the Confederates were smarter, they would have realized, hey, let's just put our guys on horses.
Right. Every single one of our guys are cavalry now.
Right. It's crazy stuff. You would think, well, I mean, it makes sense. More people are riding horses in the South than they were up north, even though everybody was still riding horses everywhere.
I mean, the horses didn't mean anything. So we already established once they got into battle range, they got off their horses and fought like infantry anyways.
Right. But still, they're just better on their horses than doing the navigating everything.
I guess.
Plus, I guess, too, most of the fighting happened in the South.
Right.
Milroy also often recorded many other grand-sounding cavalry excursions, supposedly capturing or killing many of the Colonel John Mosby's Rangers in the weeks and months leading up to June. However, the records of Mosby's Rangers do not corroborate or mention most of these engagements, so Milroy's lying.
Right.
Milroy's farthest outlying vignettes to the south were located at or near Parkin's Mill Battery at the Opequon Creek crossing, a mere 4 miles south of Winchester. This dude, look at this guy.
He's got to bust up his battle resume.
I guess. Other reports of federal vignettes to the west of Winchester were never seen or encountered by Confederate forces.
Right. Well, Winchester was heavily fortified by forts and lunettes circumferencing the town, as well as along the outlying turnpike routes entering town. Within Winchester, Milroy constructed or improved 10 defensive fortifications numbered Battery 1 through 10, making improvements on many pre-existing forts and fortifications left by prior Confederate and Federal occupations.
All right.
The fortifications were linked in places with roads and trenches, and the use of these were a key to Milroy's defensive strategy. Through a combination of retreating his forces into the defensive works and then using his long-range heavy artillery, Milroy felt that he could hold out for weeks, if not months, against any force that may be thrown against him. During the battle, Milroy concentrated his forces on the ridges west of town and his 3 highest and most improved forts connected by trenches.
Ooh, well, the larger forts were named. Battery number 2, Fort Milroy. Originally built by Confederate troops and called the fortification on the Heights, or the main fort. This was improved under Major General Banks and called Fort Garibaldi by the 39th New York Regiment. The fort was improved extensively by Milroy's troops and held 14 guns, including heavy artillery, and renamed Fort Milroy, but then renamed Fort Jackson after the battle. Okay. Milroy just wasn't good enough.
Guess not.
Then you had Battery number 3, which is Star Fort. This fort was built by federal troops in 1862, improved by Milroy, and equipped with 8 guns, and is also renamed Fort Alabama. Moving on to Battery number 5, which is called West Fort. This was a 4-gun lunette located due west of Fort Milroy, later renamed Louisiana Heights. The lesser fortifications initially used, but abandoned by Milroy during the course of the battle, were Battery 1, a linear entrenchment lunette along the Bowers Hill south of Fort Milroy. Battery number 4, a large Star lunette with entrenchments and minor lunettes containing 6 guns located due north of Fort Star, along the same ridge line as
Fort Star.
As Fort Star, yeah. Battery number 6, a small lunette with 2 guns on a hill peak located between West Fort and Battery 7, modern exit of Virginia 37 onto Virginia 522, so you guys know where that's at.
If you're from Virginia, I would suppose.
Yeah. Then you have Battery number 7, a large lunette and trench line with 8 guns on Apple Pie Ridge, west of Apple Pie Ridge Road, modern day James Wood Road. Nope, James Wood High School, sorry.
Cool.
All right. And then you have Battery number 8, a grouping of 2 redans downhill west of the Star Fort. Then you had Battery number 9, which is in an unknown location. Battery number 10, this was the Confederate Fort Collier, built on the east side of the Martinsburg Turnpike on the north end of town. Then you had fortification at Opequon Crossing, which is called Parkin's Mill Battery, a lunette or redan 4 miles south of Winchester at the Opequon River crossing on the Front Royal Turnpike. So they're everywhere.
Right. Well, June 13th, Ewell and his generals were well acquainted with the tactical situation in Winchester, having fought through here under the Lieutenant Jackson during the First Battle of Winchester, which we've covered, and understood the layout of the various fortifications and terrain, masking opportunities on the west side of town. Therefore, Ewell further split his main attack of 2 divisions into Two basic flanking movements,
Right.
which was west on the left flanking movement. Units were Early's Division, Brown's Artillery Battalion, 1st Maryland Infantry Battalion, and the Baltimore Light Artillery. They were to move west to Newton on the Valley Pike. And the objective was to approach Winchester from the southeast and seek flanking avenues of approach from the west and northwest ridges of town. Then we had the east flanking movement, which was on the right, with the units of Johnson's divisions, the 16th Virginia Cavalry Battalion. They were going to go northwest to Winchester on the Front Royal Pike. Okay. The objective was to perform demonstrations moving north along the east side of Winchester to divert attention from Early's movements.
Makes sense.
Yes, sir.
Makes sense. Johnson's division, while moving northwest on the Front Royal Pike, drove back federal pickets at the Opequon River crossing around 8:30 a.m. and engaged in cavalry skirmishes at Hoge Run around 9:30 a.m. Johnson's advance stalled under fire from Fort Milroy's heavy guns shortly before noon, and skirmishing and artillery engagements commenced afterward with federal artillery located on the hill near Hollingsworth Mill. Johnson held his position at the point to synchronize with the arrival of Early's division. Well, at least he held.
Well, and then Ewell ordered Early's division to cross west via Nineveh to Newtown and then move north onto the Valley Pike. Arriving at the outskirts of Kernstown, light infantry and artillery engagements commenced around noon. Late in the afternoon, around 4, Early pushed back federal skirmishers at the Valley Pike toll gate, and they had tolls back then too.
Right.
And after minor engagements, the federal forces retreated north of Abrams Creek.
Well, at least the federal forces are retreating, I guess. I don't know. Is that a win for the...
No.
Nah. Milroy, despite the engagements up to the point, still had no idea that he was facing the entire Second Corps of Lee's army. Milroy, here we go again. Oh, come on. Milroy concentrated all of his forces in the 3 forts defending the town, having feared exactly this type of scenario. General-in-Chief Halleck had asked Schenck to order Milroy to fall back from Winchester to Harper's Ferry. Although Schenck had discussed evacuation with Milroy, he left no clear direction for Milroy to evacuate.
Oh, jeez.
Since Milroy had convinced Schenck that his defensive position in Winchester was strong. He's like, well, Halleck don't know shit.
Right. Well, he's not out here.
Right, he don't know.
He's in Washington.
Right. Milroy had previously decided to disregard concerns from Washington because he was confident that the strength of his fortifications would allow his garrison to withstand an assault.
Remember, he
or a
already
siege.
said that he could be here for
Right.
weeks, even months.
Like,
So
he's like, dude, Halleck don't even know what we got going on
he's
down
already
there.
got it in his head that he can hold out. So Ewell, based on good intelligence from sources in the lower valley, had foreseen that Milroy's only escape route could be successfully blocked and had already anticipated by having Rhodes' division advance on Martinsville via Berryville to cut off Milroy's expected retreat route per his plans from June 11th. That afternoon, having reached Berryville, Rhodes' division and Jenkins' cavalry brigade attempted to capture McReynolds' brigade, which is all the plan so far that they've laid out. But, alerted to the Confederate movement by the firing of signal guns by Milroy's main force, McReynolds withdrew to Winchester, where his force occupied the Star Fort north of town. Okay, so a little bit more manpower at the forts, I guess.
Right. Nevertheless, the Confederates were able to capture portions of the federal supply train at nearby Bunker Hill.
Ooh.
Oh, that's in West Virginia, along with 75 prisoners. Wow. Subsequently, Confederate forces cut the telegram line into Winchester, eliminating Milroy's only line of communication. And by sundown on the 13th of June, Rhodes' division had reached Martinsburg, capturing the town along with 5 federal artillery pieces.
Jeez.
The night of the 13th of June, a storm arose, and a strong rain drenched Winchester and the lower valley all night long.
All night. Well, at dawn on June 14th, Gordon's brigade swept forward to capture Bowers Hill with little resistance. Johnson extended his line to the right against very light opposition.
The North probably wasn't expecting. They're like, dude, it just rained crazy last night. These guys ain't going nowhere. Like, then South was like, dude.
That's why they're idiots.
Right.
They're
like, dude.
There was fitful skirmishing in the streets of Winchester now.
Oh, shit.
Early and Ewell conferred on Bowers Hill and decided on a flanking strategy. Gordon's brigade and 2 batteries were left on Bowers Hill, while Early led his 3 other brigades back to Cedar Creek grade, west beyond Apple Pie Ridge, where it was out of view of federal fortifications, then north over Cloverdale Plantation to Walnut Grove.
Oh. Walmart?
Walnut.
Walmart Grove?
Sorry, guys that are listening to this. Obviously, you don't have the map in front of you. But You can look it up.
Right.
His column was accompanied by 20 guns. While Early made this march, Johnson advanced a line of skirmishers on the right to occupy the Federals' attention, providing diversionary skirmishing all day from 10 a.m. until about 4 p.m.
Confederate batteries on Bowers Hill opened up, touching off a duel with the Federal guns in Fort Milroy. By mid-afternoon, Early's force had gained a position opposite West Fort on Apple Pie Ridge. 8 guns were positioned on the Brierley Farm northwest of the fort, while 12 guns were placed in an orchard southwest of the fort. But by this time, the field had quieted. Within the Federal forts, Milroy and his sub-commanders believed that the Confederates had been repulsed from the Winchester. Still seemingly unaware that they were now totally surrounded and cut off.
Oh my gosh, dude. This Milroy. What is it with these Union generals? They all freaking suck, dude. Seriously.
They're like, we still got that cutoff route. Well, they didn't know that Rhodes and his entire division were occupying their primary escape route north.
Jeez.
Oh, no.
About 6 p.m., Early's artillery opened fire on West Fort. The 20 guns fired for 45 minutes, while Hayes stealthily advanced his Louisiana brigade through the corn and wheat fields at the base of Apple Pie Ridge. On command, the brigade rushed forward across 300 yards of open fields and swept upward into the works. After a brief hand-to-hand struggle, the Federal defenders abandoned the works, retreating to Fort Milroy, while their own captured artillery were turned around and used against them. Hayes was supported in the attack by Smith's and Avery's brigade, and Early consolidated his line on West Fort, or Flint Ridge, but darkness prevented further gains. You know they ain't doing nothing more in darkness after Old Stonewall. An artillery duel continued until long after dark, though. After the battle, Ewell christened West Fort Ridge as Louisiana Heights in honor of Hayes' brigade. That evening, Ewell located his corps headquarters at the Bowers House, while Early's division pounded away at the Milroy's main fort in an artillery duel well into the night.
You know, I understand the artillery duel, just to show that we're both still here, you know. You might get lucky.
I might bust up some walls or something.
But most of it, you're just wasting ammo.
Plus, it prevents people from moving forward.
That's true. Ewell assumed that Milroy might attempt a retreat during the night and ordered Johnson to prevent his escape by marching north and cutting off an escape to the east-northeast via the Charlestown Road, a potential escape route that could possibly bypass the position of the Rhodes Division in the north. Therefore, about 9 p.m., Johnson, with Stewart's and Williams' brigades, and 8 guns, they commenced a night march north to Berryville Pike and west to Jordan Springs Road, where he turned north toward Stevenson's Depot, a train stop on the Winchester and Potomac Railroad near the intersection of the Martinsburg Pike and the Charlestown Road.
Okay.
Cool. About midnight, the Stonewall Brigade, oh, poor guy, disengaged and joined the rear of the column, leaving one brigade, which was Jones's, astride, so he can stay at the Berryville Pike east of town.
Also at 9 p.m., a formal council of war. At a formal council of war, Milroy and his officers made the decision to try to, quote-unquote, cut their way through to Harper's Ferry on the old Charlestown Road, the very same road the Confederate Johnson and his division were marching toward to cut off. Jeez.
I'm going to take my regiment to the Charlestown Road. I'm going to cut my way through Harper's Ferry.
Right. All of the cannons were spiked and their carriages destroyed. Shortly after midnight, the Federal soldiers pulled their colors and left their work so quietly that Early's Confederates did not know they were gone until morning.
Oh, damn.
The column massed in the low ground between Stark Fort and Fort Milroy then moved along the railroad line and the Valley Pike toward the Charlestown Crossroad just south of Stevenson's Depot.
Okay. Near dawn, June 15th, 1863, Johnson's skirmishers encountered the heat of the...
Or the head.
Right. Johnson's skirmishers encountered the head of Milroy's retreating column near the intersection of Valley Pike and Old Charlestown Road. Milroy faced his column to the right on the pike and prepared to fight his way out of a murderous trap by enveloping the enemy. Johnson deployed his regiments along Milburn Road.
He went around and was cutting everybody's tongue with the paper cut. You know?
Oh, paper cuts, that's the worst. Right. I'd rather get shot with a cannon.
All right.
Johnson deployed his regiments along Milburn Road as they came up and advanced to the railroad and placed 2 guns on either side of the Charlestown Road railroad bridge. The rest of the artillery was deployed on the heights east of Milburn Road. As it grew light, Federal forces made several desperate but uncoordinated attacks against the bridge and the railroad embankment. The Confederates were being steadily reinforced and repulsed each attempt.
Yeah. Nichols' brigade crushed the final Federal attack, and the Stonewall Brigade then came up in line of battle north of the road and advanced to cut the Valley Pike.
Nice.
This was the final blow, and some remaining Federal regiments hoisted the white flag. At some point, Milroy's horse was shot from out from under him, and the division as a whole scattered in various directions to the northwest, the north, and the northeast.
Dang.
With some small groups even managing to escape covertly to the southeast toward and through the Manassas Gap into federally controlled territory.
Oh, wow.
They're gone, dude.
Gone. Both Union and Confederate official record reports on casualties are practically identical. Well, Ewell from the Confederates reported, the fruits of this victory were 23 pieces of artillery, nearly all rifled.
Nice.
4,000 prisoners, 300 loaded wagons, more than 300 horses, and quite large amounts of commissary and quartermaster's stores. This prisoner count that Ewell says he has, it seemed to include all of the capture of the Federal wounded hospitalized in Winchester. So that don't count.
Right.
Since Ewell's topographer, Jedediah Hotchkiss, counts about 2,000 prisoners from the town, along with an estimate of about 1,500 that escaped to Harper's Ferry, along with more prisoners captured during pursuits from the Confederate cavalry. When Milroy appeared later in Harper's Ferry, he was immediately placed under arrest. Damn.
Yep.
He thought he was cool. He was like, all right. I just need to go check shit out. And they're like, oh, we've been waiting for you, mofo.
Come on. Shortly after Schenck reported Milroy's arrest had expired, aide-de-camp Captain Frederick A. Palmer of the 18th Connecticut Infantry reported in an extensive and detailed table of all units summarized. 7 officers and 88 enlisted men were killed, 12 officers, 336 enlisted men were wounded, and 144 officers and 3,856 enlisted men were captured or missing. Thus, while Ewell reports 4,000 captured, the 8th Corps reports 144 officers, and obviously we just said men missing or captured was also adds up to 4,000. Captain Palmer summarized the Union losses a total of 4,443 for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Brigades from the 2nd Division,
Wow.
8th Corps, including all independent attachments. Johnson's division alone captured 3,500 prisoners in the action at Stevenson's Depot, and this is not surprising since this is the only major engagement of the war in which an entire division column was attacked at night while route marching on a road.
Right.
Okay. Well, General Johnson claimed to have taken 30 prisoners with his opera glass, as well as 11 stands of colors, 175 horses and arms, and accoutrements of every description. Okay, whatever that is.
Right. All right. Some casualty estimates range lower, though. Eicher writes that Confederate casualties were 269, 47 killed, 219 wounded, 3 missing. Union at 3,801, 95 killed, 348 wounded, 3,558 missing or captured. Difficult to account for in records are additional numbers of the captured Union soldiers from the many hospitals in Winchester. So, yeah, so if the first reports are right.
It's about 4,000.
Yeah, get the hell out of here. Frick you, Eicher, whoever your name is. The casualty ratio in this engagement of 2 divisions against 1 was an amazing 269 to 4,443 or 0.06%. That's crazy. The most lopsided for engagement of this size in the entire war.
Wow.
It's no wonder that the Confederate artillerist Major Robert Stiles wrote, "This battle at Winchester was one of the most perfect pieces of the work the Army of the Northern Virginia ever did."
Yeah, they had no chance.
Right.
Meanwhile, Milroy and his staff, his cavalry, and other small units, totaling about 1,200, escaped to Harper's Ferry, because of course they did. Additionally, in the days following the battle, 2,700 more turned up in Bloody Run, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
Milroy's command ceased to exist, and the scattered remnants of what was the 2nd Division, 8th Corps.
So 2,700 turned up out of the 4,000 missing? Or
Those are the ones that all just took off, dude.
All right. They finally, at least they went back.
I don't think that was part of the 4,000 missing.
All right.
Maybe. Milroy's command ceased to exist, and the scattered remnants of what was the 2nd Division of the 8th Corps were assimilated back into the Middle Department, while Milroy was placed under arrest. The Confederates had merely hoped to resupply and forage, but with the easy capture of Winchester, they captured enough artillery and horses to equip a battalion of infantry and cavalry,
Dude, you ain't
including
kidding.
28 guns, which they got 23 at Winchester and 5 at Martinsburg, and 300 horses in total. Crazy.
Yeah. Dude, 300 horses, that's a lot.
They just supplied a whole new regiment, dude.
You ain't kidding.
Additionally, the Confederates captured a great quantity of food, clothing, small arms, ammunition, and medical stores in Winchester.
They loved that even more than anything else that they got.
Right, especially that clothing.
Oh, you ain't kidding.
Following this battle, a court of inquiry was held, and both President Lincoln and Halleck desired to know who disobeyed the orders to evacuate Winchester. See? Yeah, because he was told to evacuate, and he fucked himself, dude.
Well, but Shank let him though.
I guess.
So it has to be on Shank.
Why is Shank arrested?
Right. Shank was the leading officer, but Milroy's the one who decided to,
Idiot.
Well, President Abraham Lincoln wrote to Milroy, and it says this: Major General Milroy, I have never doubted your courage and devotion to the cause, but I have scarcely seen anything from you at any time that did not contain imputations against your superiors and a chafing against acting the part they have assigned you.
Imagine getting this from the president,
Right.
like basically telling you he's a disappointed father.
Right. And he continues on and says, you have constantly urged the idea that you were persecuted because you did not come from West Point. And you repeat it in these letters. Well, I mean, West Point was a huge thing back then. If you didn't go to West Point, you were nothing. This, my dear general, is, I fear, the rock on which you have split. Abraham Lincoln, 29th of June, 1863.
Oh, the nature of the inquiry was later changed from investigating who disobeyed orders to evacuate Winchester to the discovery of the events and nature of the retreat from Winchester. Milroy was exonerated and claimed that his brilliant defensive action at Winchester was instrumental in causing the timing of the Battle of Gettysburg, leading to the overall Union victory for the campaign. Despite this, Halleck insisted that Milroy not be given any more commands. We're like,
No.
we can't trust this guy.
Right.
That's for sure.
He got lucky once.
Right.
The victory at Second Winchester declared the valley of federal troops and opened the door for Lee's second invasion of the North. And
sure did.
That's what he was hoping for. The capturing of ample supplies justified Lee's conceptual plan to provision his army on the march. The federal defeat stunned the North. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton called for additional militia to be federalized. Shortly afterwards, President Lincoln requested 100,000 volunteers to repel the threatened invasion. Damn, Lincoln's like, you know what? We're stopping
need
this.
more.
We're nipping this in the bud. Several fleeing members of the scattered 87th Pennsylvania hastily tramped back to their homes near Gettysburg and in adjoining York County, Pennsylvania, spreading news to local officials that the Confederates were now in the valley in strength with apparent designs on invading Pennsylvania. He's like, dude,
they were right.
these mofos are coming. Governor Andrew Curtin of Pennsylvania, in response to these reports and other military intelligence, called for 50,000 volunteers to protect the Keystone State.
We need your help, guys.
He's like, we need your help.
Immediately following the battle, Ewell dispatched the entire Corps Cavalry Brigade under Jenkins on a raid to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania to forage and reconnoiter.
Damn right.
Ewell placed the 2nd Corps headquarters about 3 miles north of Winchester and then at Mr. Boyd's house near Bunker's Hill.
Damn right, Mr. Boyd.
The captured flag of Fort Milroy was used to create a new Confederate flag, and Ewell and Early attended a christening ceremony in which the new flag was hosted. And the fort officially renamed Fort Jackson in honor of the recently slain former 2nd Corps commander.
Right. Poor guy.
Topographer Jedediah Hotchkiss then commenced an all-day survey, creating his now famous map of the battle. Medals of Honor. During the Battle of Winchester, second one, 2 Union enlisted men and 1 officer received the Medal of Honor for their actions. 2nd Lieutenant James Durham from the 12th West Virginia Infantry, musician John T. Patterson from the 122nd Ohio Infantry, and Private Elbridge Robinson, also from the 122nd Ohio Infantry.
So you had a drummer boy get himself a Medal of Honor, huh? Nice. Good for
He
him.
probably played his ass off all through cannons and all
Never
types of
stopped.
shit flying through
I
him.
tell you what, you guys need to take a look at Durham. That dude never stopped drumming or fluting.
It was Patterson, but okay.
Yeah, you look at Patterson, he was fluting or drumming away, bud.
It's a rank equivalent to private.
Right.
So, yeah, he was right there. He was wounded while he was rescued. Oh, so he tried to rescue a fellow soldier.
Nice.
Look at him. He's only a band guy. Oh, he was taken prisoner and held for a time at Belle Isle and Libby Prison. After being released, he was present at the final battle of Appomattox Courthouse, along with the rest of his regiment. He was mustered out with his company on June 26, 1865. Damn, this dude survived the war and everything. Look at him. Good guy, huh? Then he married and died in 1922 at the... Damn, he was like 80, 75 years old. Good for him, dude. 1922, man. He saw everything, pretty much.
Almost.
He went from horses to electricity and cars. Mm-hmm. Damn, that's crazy.
Battle of Aldie took place June 17, 1863 in Loudoun County, Virginia, as part of the Gettysburg campaign. Late in the spring of 1863, tensions grew between the Union commander Joseph Hooker and his cavalry commander, Brigadier General Alfred Pleasanton, because of the latter's inability to penetrate Major General Jeb Stuart's cavalry screen and gain access to the Shenandoah Valley to locate the Army of Northern Virginia, which had been on the move since June 3rd. Wow. June 17th, Pleasanton decided to push through Stuart's screen. To accomplish his goal, he ordered Brigadier General David Gregg's division from Manassas Junction westward toward the Little River Turnpike to Aldie. Aldie was tactically important in that near the village, the Little River Turnpike intersected both the Ashby's Gap Turnpike and the Snickers Gap Turnpike, which respectively led through Ashby's Gap and Snickers Gap of the Blue Ridge Mountain into the valley.
No shit.
Right.
All right. Early that very same morning, Colonel Munford.
That sentence was made for you. Did you go back and edit this?
I should have, huh? Colonel Munford led the 2nd and 3rd Virginia Cavalry eastward across the Loudoun Valley from Upperville, that's a hell of a name, through Middleburg.
Middleburg. Is there a lower burg or something?
Right. Early that very same morning, Colonel Munford led the 2nd, 3rd Virginia Cavalry eastward across the Loudoun Valley from Upperville through Middleburg to Aldie.
And Loudoun, isn't there a racetrack there?
Yeah, if that's the same one.
It's in Virginia, so.
Loudoun is in New Hampshire.
Well, close enough.
Right. Anyhow, and they did this on the Bull Run Mountains. They did that for a reconnaissance and forage mission. Good for them. He established a line of pickets in Aldie to watch for enemy activity and withdrew his 2 regiments northwest of town on the Snickers Gap Turnpike to camp on the farm of Franklin Carter. But Franklin didn't like that.
Well, they're in Virginia, so he probably did.
Right. About 2 p.m., Brigadier General Griggs, advance column of the 2nd and 4th New York, 6th Ohio, 1st Maine, 1st Rhode Island, 1st Massachusetts, under the command of Brigadier General Judson Kilpatrick, they arrived in Aldie.
Well, just west of the village, the 1st Massachusetts encountered Munford's pickets and drove them back. Around the same time, the rest of Munford's brigade, which was 1st, 4th, 5th Virginia Cavalry, under the command of Colonel Williams Carter Wickham, arrived at Dover Mills, which was a small hamlet on Little River west of Aldie. Wickham ordered Colonel Thomas J. Rosser to take the 5th Virginia to locate a campsite closer to Aldie. As they moved east, they ran into the Massachusetts men and easily drove them back through Aldie to the main Union body. After positioning his sharpshooters, 50 men of Company 1 under Captain Reuben Boston, he did those east of William Adam Farmhouse. Rosser deployed west along a ridge that covered the 2 roads leading out of Aldie and awaited the arrival of the Federals as well as Munford and Wickham.
All right. Well, as Rosier withdrew west, the 1st Massachusetts, with aid from the 4th New York, they charged against what they believed to be a retreat. Rosier's line held, and he mounted a countercharge in concert with a sharp volley from the sharpshooters he had placed on his left, and easily drove the Federals back, securing his hold on the Ashby's Gap Turnpike. Good for Rosier.
Clearly
Rosser. Kilpatrick from the north then turned his attention towards the Snickers Gap Turnpike. An artillery duel ensued, and more cavalry on both sides soon arrived. A furious fight erupted, which at first went on in the favor of Munford, as the Federal charges were met, stopped, and then forced back by the withering volley of sharpshooters entrenched along a stone wall.
1st Massachusetts Cavalry was trapped in a blind curve on the Snickers Gap Turnpike and was destroyed, losing 198 of 294 men in the 8 companies that were engaged.
Dang.
1 detachment under Henry Lee Higginson was virtually wiped out in hand-to-hand fighting. The tide finally turned as Union reinforcements charged into the fray in the Fade-in Light, and the 6th Ohio overran Boston's detachment on the Ashby's Gap Turnpike, capturing or killing most of his men.
All right.
Fighting died down around 8 p.m. as Munford withdrew his command west towards Middleburg.
All right. Munford did not consider Aldie a defeat because withdrawal coincided with an order from Stuart to retire.
He's like, Stuart told me to anyway.
As more Federal cavalry had been sighted at Middleburg. Union casualties were about 305 dead and wounded, with Confederates losing between 110 to 119. Aldie was the first in a series of small battles along the Ashby Gap's Turnpike, in which Stuart's forces successfully delayed Pleasanton's thrust across the Loudoun Valley, depriving him of the opportunity to locate Lee's army.
Yeah, well, meanwhile, Luigi Palma di Cesnola, which was colonel of the 4th New York Cavalry, was captured during the battle and sent to Libby Prison until May of 1864.
Dang.
He would be awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions at the Battle of Eldie. Although not fully protected, the battlefield remains largely intact. Eldie and its mill look much as they did during the time of the battle. Nice. Widening of U.S. Route 50 has compromised a portion of the battlefield along the Manassas Gap Turnpike, though. Stone wall and farmsteads remain intact along the Snickers Gap Turnpike as well, which is present-day Route 734.
Beautiful. At the site of the stone wall along the blind curve where the 1st Massachusetts was decimated, a monument was erected by the survivors, and it stands to honor the service during the battle, obviously. 8th of May, 2012, Governor Bob McDonnell announced the preservation of a 5-acre site to be purchased by the Civil War Trust.
Government Bob McDonnell.
Governor Bob McDonnell. 5 acres preservation by the Civil War Trust, and later to be operated as a passive historic interpretive site by the Park Authority. Cool.
Interpretive site.
The land is along the Loudoun-Fauquier county border and was key to the June 17th to 21st, 1863 battles of Eldie, Middleburg, and Upperville. The Civil War Trust and its partners have acquired and preserved 605 acres of the battlefield in 4 different acquisitions since 2001. Cool.
Good for them. It's going to lead us directly into the Battle of Middleburg, which took place June 17th through the 19th in the same county as part of that Gettysburg campaign. Stuart now established his headquarters at Middleburg and scattered his brigades throughout the Loudoun Valley to watch for enemy activity. Early in the morning, Colonel Alfred N. Duffy, with a little line above the E, so however you... Duffy, a French-born officer, had taken the 280 men of the 1st Rhode Island Cavalry westward from the Army of the Potomac's camp near Centerville. Pleasanton had ordered him to camp at Middleburg that evening, then proceed the next day towards Nolan's Ferry, extending his march to the west as far as Snickersville. What the hell is this place? It's like, are we in Wonka's freaking factory? Duffy crossed the Bull Run Mountains at Thoroughfare Gap at 9:30 a.m., easily pushing aside pickets from John R. Chambliss's brigade.
Confederate commanders could not believe that a small Union regiment would dare to travel so deep into enemy territory without an escort. Chambliss, for the South, did not aggressively attack, fearing that the column was an advance element of a much larger enemy force. Duffy continued on his isolated march, turning north by 11 a.m. and heading to Middleburg as ordered. Arriving there by 4 p.m., Duffy drove into the few Confederate pickets deployed there and disrupted Stuart's evening of socializing with local ladies. Stuart's like, man. Stuart and his staff quickly retreated to Rector's Crossroads.
He was going to somebody else's Rector's Crossroads.
The location of his closest brigade.
Well, he then ordered Beverly Robertson to move immediately to Middleburg to crush the Union cavalry. Duffy barricaded the streets of Middleburg and dismounted half of his regiment behind stone walls and sent for help from Judson Kilpatrick's brigade near Eldie. About 7 p.m., Stuart's attack routed the vastly outnumbered Rhode Islanders. Many of Duffy's men were captured the next morning as Chambliss cut off their escape route. The Parisian colonel, he's from Paris, finally returned to the Centerville with only 4 officers and 27 men.
Oh, man.
A few stragglers eventually rejoined the shattered remnants of the regiment, and Duffy would never, ever again serve with the Army of the Potomac, although he did command cavalry in other Union armies. Yeah. Union casualties on this day which was July 17th, were reported as 250 total.
Man. Oh, Jeb Stuart, everybody's like, they keep on coming.
Well, he's about to have a major setback. Jeb is.
Well, everybody is.
No, literally in the next battle.
Well, after the Battle of Aldie, Stuart remained on the defensive, wanting to spoil any Federal attempts to force the passes in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Pleasanton tentatively sent probes towards Ashby and Snickers Gaps. He did that on June 18th. David Gregg ran into Confederate pickets around Middleburg. Stuart quickly fell back to a commanding ridge west of town. Fearing a trap, a cautious Pleasanton ordered Gregg to withdraw to Aldie. The next day, Gregg again moved against Middleburg, sending the brigades of his first cousin, Colonel J. Irvin Gregg, at the rebels, while John Buford's division swung north towards Pot House, which is New Lisbon.
Well, after a flanking march, Buford eventually occupied the ground around Pot House, pushing back 2 regiments of William Grumbo Jones's brigade in a mild skirmish. After a hard fight to clear and reinforce pickets from Middleburg, Colonel Gregg was so impressed by the Confederate position on the high ground beyond the town that he asked for support before attacking.
Right. That's cool.
Kilpatrick sent 2 regiments to help extend the Federal line, and Gregg slowly advanced. Temperature hovered around 98 degrees throughout the afternoon, sapping men and horses of energy.
Isn't that a name of a band?
Men and Horses?
No, 98 degrees.
Oh, yes. Well, not a band.
They're not a band?
They're singers. I doubt any of them play instruments. A series of Union charges finally forced Stuart's horse artillery to withdraw, and then his cavalry as well. Several of Confederate counterattacks failed to regain control of the ridge. Stuart's withdrawn a lot here.
Yeah. Late in that very day, Buford sent the United States Reserve Brigade back from the pot house, and the 2nd and 6th U.S. Cavalry Regiment seized a hotly contested hill south of the tiny village of Millville. Millville. As darkness fell, Stuart was forced to abandon his position, falling back along turnpike to stone walls behind a ravine along a stream known as Kirk's Branch. It should be Kirk's Creek.
Right. With a K.
Right.
Kirk's Country Creek.
Yes. A still cautious Pleasanton refused to follow up his success, that's the Union's problem. They never want to chase.
Nope.
And he ordered his men to rest and send out pickets. Union losses in the 19th of June fight were reported as 16 killed, 46 wounded, 37 missing. Jeb Stuart's loss, perhaps 40 men, including his chief of staff and friend, Prussian Cavalier, Heroes von Bork, who was badly wounded by a bullet in the neck. Oh.
Well, though he survived and returned to service the following spring, the bullet remained in his body for the rest of his life, and the lingering wound would ultimately result in his death from sepsis in 1895. That's a hell of a time.
Right.
How do you get sepsis 35 years after?
Right.
Civil War Trust and its partners have acquired and preserved 5 acres. That's it. For the battlefield. Middleburg is one of the most picturesque towns in North Virginia and features many buildings that existed during the war and were used as hospitals. Really? The town is at the heart of the John Singleton Mosby Heritage Area, and an interpretive center at the Rector House 4 miles west of town tells the story of the Mosby's Rangers of the Confederate Army. Good for them.
I was reading a story today. I forget this guy's name. It was Jacob something. But he got shot in the forehead.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Uh-huh.
And his eye came out of socket, and he bandaged his face up, and they only removed half the bullet, and then the rest of the half fell out years later. And he still had a hole in the middle of his freaking head, in his forehead, and he lived to be almost 90 years old. Freaking crazy.
Yeah. Everybody thought he was dead.
Right.
And then he gets up, and he's like, oh.
He's like, oh, my eye's out. I got a bullet in my middle of my forehead. Oh, my. That's crazy.
That was, he said that he saw the rebel point the gun right at him.
Right.
And then, boom. Big old dent in his forehead. That either didn't have enough powder or...
Probably not enough powder. Trying to get in there and they're spilling all that powder.
Something happened. Lucky son of a bitch, though.
Your forehead is one of the strongest part of your skull.
Lucky son of a bitch.
That's why you always get cuts in the back of your head.
Or top, clearly.
Right. You don't get concussions if you hit your forehead.
Well, that's not true. Well, spreading misinformation there.
Well, you do, but it takes a lot more unless you're Goldberg.
I was going to say Goldberg would beg to differ on that one.
Yeah, but he was hitting on top. He wasn't hitting forehead.
Yeah, whatever. Heading right back to Loudoun County because Jeb Stuart's still trying to deter old Pleasanton from getting the main body of Robert E. Lee's army, which that much was in the Shenandoah Valley just west of the small village of Upperville. And this takes place June 21st. Stuart had slowed the Federals in fighting at Aldie and Middleburg, which we just did, using ravines, creeks, and stone walls to his advantage as he slowly withdrew westward.
Following the fighting at Middleburg on the 19th of June, a heavy rainstorm during the night soaked the Loudoun Valley, ending a 6-week drought. In the downpour, Wade Hampton's brigade of the Confederate cavalry had reinforced Jeb Stuart and was deployed near Beverly Robinson's brigade. Beverly, kind of named Beverly for a guy, along the Manassas Gap turnpike. John R. Chambliss's brigade moved northward and joined Grumble Jones near Unison, Virginia. First time we heard Grumble Jones.
He was in the other battle.
Thomas T. Munford's brigade was still farther north, guarding access to Snickersville Gap. John Mosby's partisan rangers scouted the Union positions and provided much-needed intelligence on their movements.
Well, then Union Cavalry Commander Alfred Pleasanton, frustrated by Stuart's excellent uses of dismounted cavalry hiding behind stone walls, on June 20th he asked for and received infantry support from Major General George Meade's 5th Corps. Pleasanton had still not located Lee's main body, which was a task that the War Department continued to prod him to accomplish. Trying to maneuver Stuart out of position, he sent Judson Kilpatrick's brigade along the Ashby's Gap Turnpike, supported by Colonel Strong Vincent's, that's a hell of a name, brigade of infantry, with David Gregg's cavalry division in reserve, and John Buford's division would try to turn the flank. Okay.
Jeb Stuart, determined to rest his weary men on the Sabbath, did not get his wish, though, as Federal artillery opened up on his position around 8 a.m. on June 21st, 1863. After initially holding off Kilpatrick's cavalry, Stuart, effectively using stone walls and steep ravines and creeks, began to fall back under pressure from the Union infantry. He made a stand west of the hamlet of Rector's Crossroads, along the stone bridge over Goose Creek. For 2 more hours, he was able to withstand repeated Federal attacks from mounted cavalry, as well as 16th Michigan Infantry, look at that, which sent skirmishers and sharpshooters forward to pick off the Confederate gunners.
Well, ahead of the advancing Union soldiers, the Confederate artillerymen hooked up their guns to their teams and raced off, but a Blakely rifle flipped over as its crew hurried to get away. The gun was captured, and get this was the first artillery piece ever lost by Stuart's cavalry.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, however, though, with 2 of his 3 remaining guns soon also disabled, he withdrew and headed westward towards Upperville. Still fighting, delaying actions were favorable.
Jeez.
Yeah.
John Buford's Federal column had detoured to attack the new Confederate left flank near Upperville, while J. Irvin Gregg's and Judson Kilpatrick's brigade advanced from the east along the Ashby's Gap Turnpike. Buford soon encountered Grumble Jones and Chambliss's Confederate brigades, escorting Stuart's supply train just north of Upperville, and they attacked. Meanwhile, Kilpatrick's troopers attacked Hampton and Robertson on a ridgeline east of the Upperville known as Vineyard Hill. Some of the Union cavalrymen made it as far as the village before being repulsed.
After fierce mounted fighting, Stuart finally withdrew to take a strong defensive position in Ashby's Gap, even as Confederate infantry began crossing the Potomac into Maryland. As cavalry skirmishing diminished in the next few days, Stuart made the fateful decision to strike east and make a circuit of the Union Army as it marched towards Gettysburg.
Oh, man. Upperville was significant in that Stuart's successful delaying tactics prevented Pleasanton from making an accurate assessment of the location of Lee's infantry divisions, thereby depriving the Federals of much valued intelligence of their enemies' whereabouts and objectives. Civil War Trust and its partners have preserved 806 acres of the battlefield by acquisition or conservation easement.
All right, after that Battle of Upperville, we move on to the Battle of Fairfax Courthouse, taking place on June 27th, between 2 cavalry detachments from both armies. So, after Upperville, Stuart, he sought to take a useful role in the campaign and perhaps, according to some historians, to redeem his reputation and to secure the glory of another ride around the Union Army. June 22nd, Lee gave Stuart the discretionary orders for his movement to Pennsylvania, with the important point being, if you find that the enemy is moving northward and that 2 brigades can guard the Blue Ridge and take care of your rear, you can move with the other 3 into Maryland and take position on General Ewell's right. Lee wrote to Stuart again on June 23rd in an apparent effort to clarify his orders as follows. You will, however, be able to judge whether you can pass around their army without hindrance, doing them all the damage you can, and cross the river east of the mountains. In either case, after crossing the river, you must move on and feel the right of Ewell's troops. Lee's order did not give Stuart a specific route to follow. Confederate Colonel Edward Porter Alexander, Chief of Artillery of Longstreet's Corps, he stated that Stuart made to Lee a very unwise proposition, which Lee more unwisely entertained. Major John S. Mosby, scouting for Stuart with a small group of partisan rangers, he told Stuart that he could cut through the separated Union Corps, cross the Potomac at Seneca Ford, 20 miles northwest of Washington, and disrupt Hooker's communications and supplies, possibly even divert his army toward the defense of Washington. Stuart was eager to restore his reputation after being surprised and evenly fought at Brandy Station in Upperville. After Mosby reported that Hooker did not seem to be moving, June 24th, Stuart used the discretion in his orders to follow Mosby's advice and attempt to ride through and around the Union Army and, as he said thereafter, to meet Ewell at York, Pennsylvania. Historian Edwin B. Coddington, he said the directive to damage the Union forces on the way was an invitation to delay. Taking his 3 most experienced brigades under Brigadier Generals Wade Hampton and Fitzhugh Lee, and Colonel John Chambliss, in temporary command of Rooney Lee's brigade because he had been wounded, Stuart, he left brigades of Brigadier Generals Beverly Robinson and Grumble Jones with all but one of his artillery batteries to guard the mountain passes and to catch up with the infantry after the Union forces had departed. After spending June 24th in preparation and concentrating his forces at Salem, Stuart, he started for Haymarket, Virginia by way of Glasscock Gap in the Bull Run Mountains, June 25th. Before reaching his objective, Stuart, he ran into Union Major General Winfield Scott Hancock's 2nd Corps. He fired a few artillery shells, then withdrew. Then he sent Fitzhugh Lee's brigade to Gainesville, Virginia, and stopped at Buckland, Virginia, with his other 2 brigades in order to allow his horses to graze as they had no forage. The incident with Hancock's corps prevented Stuart from meeting again with Mosby, and instead of turning back to catch up with the infantry as quickly as possible, Stuart waited for Mosby for 10 hours, June 26th, then marched for 20 miles and again grazed his horses near Wolf Run Shoals, which is on the Occoquan River, before moving on towards Fairfax Station early June 27th. Back on June 26th, the U.S. War Department ordered Colonel James B. Swain of the 11th Regiment New York Volunteer Cavalry, which was part of the 22nd Corps of the Union Army stationed in Washington, D.C. defenses. He ordered them to send a squad of troops to scout in the vicinity of Centerville, Virginia, and to guard any remaining Army supplies at Fairfax Courthouse. Swain, he sent the regiment's B and C companies, 82 enlisted men, and Captain Alexander Campbell, 1st Lieutenant Albert Holmes, 2nd Lieutenant Augustus Hazelton, and 1st Lieutenant George Dagwell, which were all under the command of Major Seth Pierre Remington on the mission. The detachment left the same afternoon, and by 10 p.m. the troops were camped at Fairfax Courthouse, which the Union Army had left the day before. Fires of coffee and bacon from the Union Army depot were burning when the squad arrived, and the men saw that they decided must be local citizens examining the area and scavenging during the night. Early June 27th, the New York troops left for Centerville. They watered their horses at a small stream crossing the road just outside of Fairfax Courthouse, which would be the scene of some action when they returned. Upon their arrival at Centerville about 10 a.m., they found some Union Army hospital supplies, which they inventoried and put in the care of a local storekeeper. The soldiers thought they had seen mounted men in the woods in the direction of Fairfax Station at this time as well. When they started their return trip, the cavalrymen came under fire from the woods about 3 miles from the courthouse. Major Remington sent 2 squads of 4 dismounted men into the woods to investigate. One of the men's horses bolted and started to run towards Fairfax Courthouse. Lieutenant Dagwell pursued the runaway horse and met the advance guard of 4 men of the detachment just outside their old camp, where they found citizens loading wagons with everything of value that had not been removed or burned by the Union Army in their move north. As Lieutenant Dagwell found the horse entering the courtyard of the courthouse, he saw that the yard was filled with what he estimated to be about 65 Confederate troops. Believing the Confederates must be some of Major John Mosby's partisans, Dagwell turned his horse and fled as the Confederates fired at him. When he returned to the area of the stream crossing the road into town, and the rest of the New York troops came up, they found Confederates were drawn up in line in the woods up a ravine across the stream outside of town. Dagwell's company, under fire but with no one hit, he charged the Confederates, sending them retreating down the road to the Fairfax Station. Dagwell, Holmes, and a few troops, they pursued the last of the fleeing Confederates, killing one and capturing a few others. About one half mile east of Fairfax Station, Stuart's staff officers, Major Andrew Reed Venable, Major Henry B. McClellan, and Captain John Eston Cook, along with a courier, they were eating breakfast at the house of a blacksmith who was shoeing their horses. They were then disturbed by some of the 11th New York cavalrymen running by the road. Cook did not immediately flee because he wanted to have his horses shoed, but when a second group from the 11th New York Cavalry approached, Cook barely escaped. Continuing his pursuit, Dagwell came to the crest of a hill near Fairfax Station, where the road led down to Fairfax Station, and where a few Union troops had outpaced him had halted. They saw that Dagwell estimated was at least 2,000 Confederate troops and an artillery battery. The New Yorkers had come upon Stuart's force on their way north. Dagwell then realized that the small force they had driven from Fairfax Courthouse was not a group of Mosby's men, but was the advance guard of at least an entire Confederate brigade. Dagwell then sent a soldier with the freshest-looking horse back to tell Remington of the situation, and that he and the 8 men with him would return as soon as their horses could recover from their just-completed pursuit. Dagwell and his 8 men had to rest their horses, but Dagwell could see the Confederates mounting up only about 600 yards from his small squad. Before the old rebels could approach Dagwell and his men, Major Remington appeared with the rest of the detachment. When informed of the situation, Remington did not try to flee, but he ordered his men in line at the crest of the hill where Dagwell had viewed the 2,000-man Confederate force. Meanwhile, Stuart had heard about the encounter with his staff officers. He ordered Brigadier General Wade Hampton III to bring up the lead regiment quickly to meet the threat. The advance unit of the Confederates, which was the 1st North Carolina Cavalry, then came over the hill and moved to within 30 yards of the Union line, but did not move further despite orders which Dagwell could hear. When the Union troops did not surrender after about 15 seconds, the opposing forces began to shoot at each other. Major Remington then ordered a squad to charge the Confederate force, which Dagwell had just told him must be an entire brigade of Confederate cavalry, and had correctly estimated as being a minimum of 2,000 men. The advanced Confederates broke into the woods, and Dagwell followed, only to soon find that he was alone. When he came out to the point the New Yorkers had formed their line, he found only 5 Union men, but also saw several dead and wounded Confederates, including a dead Confederate major beside the road. Major John Whitaker, commander of the 1st North Carolina Cavalry, was killed during the action. Sergeant Charles Hartwell, he stated that the New Yorkers killed 5 Confederates, took 14 prisoners. And Hartwell soon found himself with about a dozen men, which included Major Remington, cut off from the other Union troops. Remington and a few others, including Sergeant Morris, in the face of overwhelming numbers, they had retreated from nearby hill to reach Remington, which had moved most of the men after their initial charge. When he saw the Union movement, Hampton thought they were trying to position themselves to attack the rear of his force, and sent a squadron to outflank them, virtually surrounding the majority of the Union men. Sergeant Morris shot a Confederate officer who assaulted Major Remington during the melee, during the fight for escape of the New Yorkers not trapped on the hill. After desperate fighting with pistols and sabers, Remington determined the situation was hopeless and ordered the men with him to withdraw. Remington, Captain Campbell, 9 men, including Sergeant Hartwell, they all escaped along the railroad to a road that led to Annandale, Virginia. After a brief encounter with a squad of Confederate cavalry along the way, Remington and his party reached the Alexandria, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. defenses. Historian Robert O'Neill, he states that at least 3 of the Union troopers were killed, 1 mortally wounded, 14 wounded and captured, 19 captured, and 4 seriously wounded and left at a nearby home. The walking wounded and able-bodied were taken along by the Confederates as prisoners. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Dagwell soon determined that they were cut off from the main body of the detachment and had no choice but to retreat. After withdrawing from the area of the fight, Dagwell and his small group, they headed for Fairfax Courthouse, picking up another 11 New York cavalrymen, plus a few prisoners whom he had been left to guard. After a brief fight, the Union troops scattered 5 or 6 Confederates who came upon them. With about 8 men and 5 prisoners, Dagwell headed out on the road to Washington. Arriving at Annandale, Dagwell was wounded in an unsuccessful effort to evade capture, and he and as many as 18 men, including some he had picked up along the way, they were captured by men of Fitzhugh Lee's brigade, which had detached from Stuart's other 2 brigades to proceed up the Orange and Alexandria Railroad and capture supplies. Lee's brigade also captured a sutler's wagon train and more prisoners at Annandale. Since Hooker's final headquarters before his departure from Virginia was at Fairfax Courthouse, Stuart's men took considerable amount of supplies still intact there. This allowed Stuart's men to profitably plunder the Union Army depot at Fairfax Courthouse, which included 2 warehouses and a sutler's wagon after the end of the engagement. After his men had eaten and rested for 1 or 2 hours, Stuart he got his men back on the move toward Drainesville, Virginia. He then sent a letter to General Lee about the action at the courthouse and the direction of march of Hooker's army. Although a copy of the letter reached the Confederate War Department at Richmond, the message never, ever reached General Lee. The fight at the courthouse had delayed Stuart by almost an additional half a day. Lieutenant Dagwell commented that the fight at Fairfax was another lesson to the Confederates from June of 1863 that Union troops were ready to dispute with them. He and Sergeant Morris commented on the delay caused to Stuart by the action and its effect as on his late arrival at Gettysburg. Well, good for them. After resting for several hours at Fairfax Courthouse, Stuart he moved on to Drainesville, where Fitzhugh Lee's brigade rejoined him. He then decided to cross the Potomac that night at Rouser's Ford, Because of the higher than normal water level, the Confederate crossing was not completed until 3 a.m. June 28th. From Union prisoners captured at the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal just north of the river, Stuart, he learned that Hooker had been at Poolesville, Maryland, 15 miles to the west on the previous day, and that the Army of the Potomac was headed north towards Frederick, Maryland. From this intelligence, he realized he should attempt to join Ewell as soon as possible. Stuart nonetheless delayed his ride to capture a Union Army wagon train near Rockville, Maryland, and to take additional prisoners, including a few fugitives from the old 11th New York. He proceeded another 10 miles to Brookville, Maryland that day. And that's where he realized that the prisoners would further delay and burden his men on the move if he continued to take them along. So at Brookville, June 28th, before the Confederates paroled the prisoners, Stuart interrogated one of them from the 11th New York, asking how many men had made the charge. He was truthfully told that it was a single squadron and was not part of Pleasanton's command. Stuart reportedly responded, "And you charged my command with 82 men? Give me 500 such men and I will charge through the Army of the Potomac with them." Stuart also approached Lieutenant Dagwell during the interrogation in an effort to discover whether Captain Campbell, who reportedly had threatened to execute Confederate prisoners, was among the 11th New York. During the night of June 28 and into the early morning of June 29th, Stuart's Adjutant General and Chief of Staff Major Henry McClellan and other staff officers spent time and energy paroling prisoners, including those from the 11th New York. On the evening of June 29th, Stuart's advance party, which was the 4th Virginia Volunteer Cavalry Regiment, they chased 2 companies of the 1st Delaware Cavalry Regiment a long distance down the road to Baltimore from Westminster, losing 2 lieutenants in the process. June 30th, the riders leading Stuart's column saw a large column of the Union cavalry across their path. Encumbered by the wagon train and some new prisoners, Stuart's vanguard clashed with Union cavalry under the command of Brigadier General Judson Kilpatrick at the Battle of Hanover, which we'll get to near Hanover, Pennsylvania. And then we got a few more battles before we reach ultimately Gettysburg. In the account published in Thomas West Smith's book in 1897, Lieutenant Dagwell noted that the fight at Fairfax prevented Stuart from crossing the Potomac June 27th, contributing to his delay in rejoining the Army of Northern Virginia before the Battle of Gettysburg. Historian Eric Wittenberg stated, "The brave, desperate, and hopeless charge of the 11th New York at Fairfax Courthouse hindered Stuart for half a day. Because the Confederates were defeated at Gettysburg, they sought to explain the defeat based on their own failures and weaknesses. Stuart received more criticism for his delay in rejoining the main body of the Confederates than most other Confederate commanders for their failures. The criticism came not just from civilians, but from his Army colleagues as well." On the other hand, modern historians Wettenberg and Petruzzi, after examining Stuart's ride and how Robert E. Lee fought the Battle of Gettysburg, and admitted that any analysis based on Stuart's cavalry rejoining the Army earlier in the campaign was speculative, concluded that the Confederates would have lost the battle whether Stuart had shown up earlier or not. Yeah, they were screwed. A Confederate officer later recounted, "I think that without exception, the most gallant charge and the most desperate resistance that we ever met from the Federal cavalry was at Fairfax, when Stuart made a raid around the Union Army just before the Battle of Gettysburg." Okay. All right, that's going to lead us to Corbett's Charge, which was June 29th, a small little skirmish in Westminster, Maryland, on old Stuart. He's back at it again. Stuart's 3 brigades of cavalry, after crossing the Potomac and threatening Washington, D.C., proceeded north towards Pennsylvania, east of the main Confederate Army and pursuing Union forces, following loose instructions from Confederate Commander Robert E. Lee. Meanwhile, Companies C and D of the 1st Delaware, they were sent from Baltimore to Westminster to guard the Western Maryland Railroad junction, and arrived the day before the battle. The Delaware cavalry companies, totaling less than 100, and commanded by Major Napoleon Knight, had arrived unaware of Stuart's impending approach, camped near the northwestern end of town, and found the town quiet. The next day, some of the Union troopers decided to have their horses reshod at a stable near the southern end of town, and while there, the 1st Confederate Cavalry arrived at the southern end of Westminster and captured those troopers. Major Knight was absent then, so Captain Charles Corbett, one of the company commanders, rallied the remaining troops and led a cavalry charge down Main Street in Westminster towards Stuart's cavalry, meeting them at the intersection with Washington Road. They were quickly defeated by the Confederates, and Captain Corbett, along with the other company commander, Lieutenant Caleb Churchman, they were captured along with more than half the other Union troops. 2 were killed, 11 wounded, 2 Confederate officers were killed, and 10 more troopers were wounded. One of the Confederate officers, Lieutenant John William Murray, Company E, 4th Virginia Cavalry, He remains buried in the graveyard of Ascension Episcopal Church. And just like Fairfax, this battle prompted Stuart's cavalry to stay the night in Westminster, delaying his arrival at Gettysburg and depriving Lee of important intelligence about Union troop movements and leading him to commit to fighting at Gettysburg. 2003, the city of Westminster began holding the commemoration of Corbett's charge during the last full weekend of June, which has grown into a festival including Civil War reenactors, demonstrations, museum tours, musical concerts, and more.
Moving on to the Battle of Hanover, and it took place on the 30th of June, 1863, in Hanover, of course, southwestern York County, Pennsylvania. As part of the Gettysburg campaign, Robert E. Lee moved his Northern Army of Virginia northward in June of 1863 through the Shenandoah Valley towards Pennsylvania. Portions of his cavalry under Jeb Stuart slipped eastward across the paths of the Union Army of Potomac. A series of raids in eastern Maryland netted prisoners and supplies, as well as disrupting federal communications and telegraph lines.
However, though, Stuart was not in position to effectively screen Lee's advance or to provide intelligence on the movements of the Federal Army. What are you there for? He's screwing up big time.
Right.
As Stuart headed north in an effort to link with Lee, Union Cavalry Commander Major General Alfred Pleasonton, riding towards Pennsylvania to the west of Stuart, ordered his divisions to fan out across a wide swath, keeping an eye out for the ribs. Brigadier General Judson Kilpatrick's division was on the Union right flank. The majority of his men passed through Hanover early in the morning of June 30th, pausing briefly for refreshments and to receive greetings of the jubilant townspeople.
Oh, well, the townspeople, they're like, man, our town was just raided 3 days ago. Where in the hell were you guys at then?
Right.
Confederate Lieutenant Colonel Elijah White's cavalry, attached to Major General Jubal Early's. Hey, what happened to that guy?
He'll play a pretty big part coming up in 1864.
Well, they're attached to Early's division that had occupied York County. White's Virginians and Marylanders had followed the railroad to Hanover from nearby Gettysburg.
Damn, the Confederates had a Maryland regiment thing?
Crazy. And taken horses, food, supplies, clothing, shoes, and other desired items from the townspeople. They're like, we want it all.
We want this handkerchief.
Often paying with valueless Confederate money or drafts on the Confederate government. They're like, we give you this. What the hell am I going to do with that? I'll take pesos.
Right.
White's raiders had destroyed the area's telegraph wires, cutting off communications with the outside world, before sacking the nearby Hanover Junction train station. The unexpected arrival of Kilpatrick's columns from the north was a pleasant surprise to the residents of Hanover, who warmly greeted the Union soldiers with food and drink, what we got left.
Right. Well, most of Kilpatrick's men remounted and passed through town, heading northward towards the nearby Pigeon Hills towards Abbottstown. He left behind a small rear guard force to picket the road south and west of Hanover. In the meantime, Stuart had left his billet at Shriver's Corner in Maryland and was proceeding northward across the Mason-Dixon line into Pennsylvania. Hearing that Federal cavalry has been spotted near his intended destination, which was Littlestown, Pennsylvania, he instead turned towards Hanover in adjacent York County. Oh. His progress was slowed considerably by a cumbersome train of over 125 heavily laden supply wagons that he captured near... Oh, it's his train that he captured near Rockville, Maryland. In addition, he had skirmished with Delaware cavalry on June 29th at Westminster, Maryland, further delaying him. This dude's always getting delayed.
Right. Shortly before 10
He's got
a.m.
125 cars of supplies and shit that he took, though? Damn.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Shortly before 10 a.m. on the 30th of June, 1863, the rear guard of the 18th Pennsylvania Cavalry encountered Confederate vedettes about 3 miles southwest of Hanover at Gitt's Mill. An ensuing exchange of small arms fire, a Confederate cavalryman died and several were wounded. Shortly afterwards, 25 men from Company G of the 18th Pennsylvania were captured by the 13th Virginia from John Chambliss's brigade, the vanguard of Stuart's oncoming cavalry. Also that morning, a series of minor engagements occurred near Littlestown and elsewhere along Stuart's path. And elsewhere.
And elsewhere.
And others.
Southwest of Hanover at a tiny hamlet now known as Pennville, the 2nd North Carolina Cavalry struck the 18th Pennsylvania's main column and split it in two. Union survivors retired in disorder through the streets of Hanover just as Stuart's horse artillery arrived, unlimbered, and opened fire. As the Confederates occupied the town in the wake of the fleeing Pennsylvanians, General Farnsworth wheeled the 5th New York Cavalry into position near the town's commons and attacked the rebel flank in the streets, forcing the Tar Heels to abandon their brief hold on the town.
Oh.
The commander of the... Oh, so when are they going to change that?
All right.
The commander of the 2nd North Carolina, William Henry Fitzhugh Payne, was captured after his dying horse pitched him into a nearby tanning bath. A Union soldier pulled Payne out and took him prisoner.
Yeah, but as more of Chamberlain, right?
It pitched him into a nearby tanning vat.
What's a tanning vat?
So it's like the stuff they use to tan and raw hide and stuff like that.
Right. That sucks. Poor guy. Now he's got to look like
a piece of leather.
As more of Chambliss's men and General Stuart arrived on the scene, they were met by additional Federals near the sprawling Carl Forney farm, just south of Hanover. Nearly surrounded in the confused fighting, Stuart and a staff officer made their escape cross-country through the hedges bordering the county line. The country lane. At one point, leaping their horses over a 15-foot wide ditch.
Damn,
I'd like to see that.
Maybe, though.
That horse was scared, too. I'd make that jump. Hearing the unmistakable sound of distant gunfire, Judson Kilpatrick raced towards Hanover, with his horse dying in the town square from the server's ride. Oh, man. He was like, dude, you just killed me.
From the severe ride.
From the server's ride.
The young general began to deploy his men in and around Hanover, barricading some streets with barrels, farm wagons, dry goods boxes, and anything else that might provide cover. Yeah, because back then, they had big-ass crates.
Right.
Dry goods were coming in. Mm-hmm. Shortly before noon, fighting at the Forney farm ceased as the rebels broke off contact. Kilpatrick positioned newly arrived, I think, right?
Maybe.
His newly arrived brigade on the farm and awaited developments. When Fitzhugh Lee's Virginia Brigade arrived, Stuart moved his and Chambliss's men into a new position on a ridge extending from the Keller Farm southwest of Hanover to Mount Olivet Cemetery southeast of town. It's like 70,000 Mount Olivet cemeteries in America.
Everywhere, dude. It's ridiculous. Meantime, Kilpatrick repositioned the brigades of the newly promoted duo of Custer and Farnsworth. He did that.
At law.
Right. He did that to form a better defensive perimeter and then brought up his guns. Leaving the captured wagons 2 miles south of town under heavy guard, Wade Hampton and at 2 p.m. brought his brigade and Breathhead's battery into position near the Mount Olivet Cemetery on the extreme right of Stuart's line. An artillery duel ensued for the better part of 2 hours as opposing cannons hurled shells over the town. Fragments blasted holes in several houses, narrowly missed killing Mrs. Henry Weinbrenner. Oh, man, you don't want to do that. And her very own daughter, who had just left their balcony when a projectile came hurtling towards them.
Through the upstairs.
Yeah.
During the prolonged artillery exchange, Custer's dismounted 6th Michigan moved forward to within 300 yards of Chambliss and the 2 guns supporting his line. Flanked and losing 15 men as prisoners, the Wolverines tried again and succeeded in securing the Littlestown Frederick Road, which opened a line of communication with the Union 12th Corps. Stuart and Kilpatrick made no further aggressive moves, and both sides initiated a series of skirmishes and minor probing actions.
Disengaging slowly and protecting his captured wagons, Jeb Oates Stuart withdrew to the northeast through Jefferson towards York, known from recent newspapers to be the location of Early's division. En route, Stuart heard at New Salem that Early's division had recently left York and marched northwestly through Dover. Stuart changed course and headed northward through the night on winding, hilly country roads, still trying to locate Early or even Lieutenant Richard Ewell, thinking that Ewell would still be towards the Susquehanna River. He's like, Ewell should be still by the Susquehanna.
Somewhere around there. Well, the head of Stuart's 17-mile-long column arrived in Dover at 2 a.m., 17-mile long.
Dude, that's ridiculous. Holy shit.
They arrived in Dover at 2 a.m. on the morning of July 1st with the rear guard there by 8 a.m. Holy shit, dude. It took another 6 hours just for the rest of his shit to get there.
Wow.
Stuart learned, how the hell do you even know what's going on in your back?
Right.
Holy
17
shit.
miles back.
Stuart learned that Early had passed through town and was heading westward to oh, my. Hey. Leave some of your guys there and go find them. Send a telegram. Say, this is where we are now.
Right.
Jeez. He learned that Early had passed through town and was heading westward towards Shippensburg as the army concentrated. Stuart paroled over 200 Union prisoners and gave his troopers a much-needed 6-hour rest, while, unknown to Stuart, Major General Henry Hess, Confederate Infantry Division, Major General Henry Hess, Confederate Infantry Division, collided with Brigadier General John Buford's Union Cavalry at Gettysburg. Stuart resumed his exhausting march through the afternoon and early evening, seizing over 1,000 fresh horses from York County farmers. Dicks. Well, I guess unless they left them theirs.
True. Leaving Hampton's brigade in the wagons at Dillsburg, Stuart headed for Carlisle, hoping to find Ewell. Instead, Stuart found nearly 3,000 Pennsylvania and New York militia occupying the borough. After lobbing a few shells into the town during early evening and burning Carlisle barracks, Stuart withdrew after midnight to the south towards Gettysburg. The fighting at Hanover, long march through York County with the captured wagons, and the brief encounter at Carlisle slowed Stuart down considerably. For his attempt to rejoin the main army and locate Lee, which he's just trying to find these guys everywhere. How do you not even know? Right. The eyes and ears of the Army of Northern Virginia had failed Robert E. Lee.
Once again. Losses at Hanover were relatively light in terms of casualties, but the cost and time delaying Stuart from linking with Lee proved to be even more costly. Estimates vary as to the number of men lost at Hanover, which the Union losses in one source are listed as 19 killed, 73 wounded, 123 missing, for a total of 215. The 18th Pennsylvania had suffered the most with 3 men killed, 24 wounded, and 57 missing.
Damn.
On the Confederate side, Stuart's losses are generally estimated as 9 dead, 50 wounded, 58 missing, for a total of 117. He was messing these Union guys up, though.
I guess so. Fighting in Hanover is commemorated by the picket, an impressive bronze statue of a mounted cavalryman. I didn't think they tried taking it down or did take it down.
It commemorates all of the unnamed cavalrymen whose names have been lost to history.
Fighting in Hanover, commemorated by the picket, an impressive bronze statue of a mounted cavalryman sculpted by famed Boston artist Cyrus E. Dolan, paid for by the state of Pennsylvania. It was erected in 1905. In the center of a square. No, at the town square. 2 bronze plaques installed by the federal government in 1901 bear inscriptions relating to the movements of the Army of the Potomac on the 30th of June and the 1st of July in 1863. In addition, a small number of artillery pieces are located on the town square as well, including serial number 1 of the Parrott rifle, the original barrel, mounted on a reproduction carriage. That's awesome.
No way.
That'd be awesome.
So the first ever Parrott rifle?
All right. A wall plaque on a modern building and a star surrounded by 4 horseshoes installed in the sidewalk mark the location of Custer's headquarters. And the Custer maple, a prominent tree used by the boy general to tether his horse.
Oh, so cute.
Oh, the boy general.
The boy general. 2005, the borough erected over a dozen wayside markers at key spots along the city streets to help interpret the battle for visitors. And 3 years later, the state added its own markers as part of the Pennsylvania Civil War Trails Initiative. However, much of the open area south of town, including the Forney Farm where Custer advanced, has been lost to modern development. As has the once open hills a half-mile north of Hanover Center Square where Kilpatrick's artillery deployed. Elder's battery of 4 cannons was deployed along what is now Stock Street east of Carlisle Street, and Pennington's battery was deployed along what is now 4th Street west of Carlisle Street. The York County History Center and some local Hanover organizations sponsor guided tours of these sites. So go there to York County and visit the battle sites, even though there's clearly not much done.
There's nothing.
Like, you're walking down the street and there's like a Rite Aid or something. There was Kilpatrick's guys.
Yeah, here's the battle site for...
What was that one?
It's McDonald's.
Yeah, not too long ago, where the site of the battle was like a Shell gas station or some shit.
Yeah.
Now,
like, so sad.
Whatever, dude. I mean, that could be a tourism spot. They're idiots.
They're dumb.
If I was running that Shell, you put a bunch of memorabilia in there and stupids. Sporting Hill was a relatively small skirmish during the Gettysburg campaign, taking place June 30th, 1863 at various locations, which is in present-day Camp Hill, East Pennsboro Township, and then Hampton Township in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. It is known as the northernmost engagement of Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia during the war.
Really? All right.
Confederate Lieutenant General Richard Ewell had led 2 full divisions and a cavalry brigade through Maryland into Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania in late June 1863 with the intention of seizing the state capital of Harrisburg.
Mechanicsburg. They couldn't think of a better name than Mechanicsburg.
What was a mechanic?
I'm sure.
Back in the 1800s.
Fixing the wheels on the wagons.
Yes. When a blacksmith do that?
Sure. All right, what would a mechanic be?
All right.
However, Ewell had been significantly delayed in crossing the rain-swollen Potomac River, which allowed time for the unit to respond. Pausing another day at Chambersburg, Ewell finally marched northwards through the Cumberland Valley towards Harrisburg. He's like, let's go.
Why does everything end in a burg, Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania's weird. In response, Union Major General Darius N. Couch, commanding the Department of Susquehanna, he dispatched troops to the present-day borough of Camp Hill, if you guys know where that's at, located in Cumberland Valley, approximately 2 miles west of Harrisburg. So all you Harrisburg folks out there. Laborers hired by Couch quickly erected earthworks and fortifications along the western portion of Bridgeport, adjacent to Camp Hill.
Bridgeportburg.
And that'd be weird, huh? Bridgeburg Port.
Berg.
This is the two largest of these became known as Fort Couch and Fort Washington.
Ewell's cavalry, a brigade under the command of Brigadier General Albert Jenkins, raided nearby Mechanicsburg on June 28th. That same evening, receiving the unexpected news that the Federal Army of the Potomac was rapidly advancing through Maryland, Robert E. Lee was forced to consolidate his army in Northern Virginia towards Gettysburg,
Damn right.
Gettysburg to counter this new threat.
Had to.
As a result, Ewell began to withdraw and would never realize the objective of taking Harrisburg.
Oh.
So he's like, well, can't take it now.
Well, Jenkins.
You think they knew?
Who?
Like
Ewell?
No, like Lee and the Confederates knew that Gettysburg was going to be so huge. I mean, you got
yeah.
280,000 armies, so it's just fucking about to just go at it, dude.
Once Lee found out, he was like, oh, man, this can be a monster. It's in the movie Gettysburg. Check it out. Jenkins briefly skirmished with the 22nd and 37th New York Militia at Sporting Hill on the west side of Camp Hill on the 29th of June, 1863. The Confederates used the barn of Johannes Elberly House, also known as the McCormick House. They used that as cover while engaging the Union soldiers' position along the Carlisle Pike. The Confederates attempted to cross the Carlisle Pike and outflank the Union soldiers, but the Federals saw their maneuver and stymied their efforts. The Confederate soldiers began artillery fire upon the Union position, with shot and shell around about 5 p.m. Just then, at that very moment, Lieutenant Perkins of the Federal Army arrived with 2 cannons and began firing upon the Eberly House, the barn. No, you already know once those cannons came, they're like, oh, shit.
Well, the Federals' very first shot at the barn smashed through the upper wooden structure and sent approximately 50 Confederate soldiers running outside to their horses.
I bet.
The Confederates withdrew in the direction of Carlisle to rejoin Ewell's infantry for the march southwards towards Heidlersburg and Gettysburg. At least 16 Confederates from the 16th and 36th Virginia Cavalry were killed during the fight, and an additional 20 to 30 were wounded. Union losses were only about 11 men wounded.
Jeez.
Good for them, huh?
Wow. Well, some of this very battlefield was lost to development and the construction of Pennsylvania Route 581. A Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission historical marker denoting the skirmish exists at the intersection of 31st Street and Market Streets in Camp Hill. I bet there's a picture of that somewhere. The wooden part of the Eberly barn where the Confederate soldiers were positioned was destroyed by a tornado on the 21st of March, 1976. But the barn's limestone foundation still remains. Both the Eberly barn foundation and the Eberly house itself are still standing.
Good for them.
Oh, the house too? Nice. They are preserved by real estate developer Tom Gowan, who built the nearby Brambles apartment complex that encircles the house. Oh shit, it's right in the middle.
There it is. Which leads us to another little skirmish, which is the Battle of Carlisle, which we just heard about on the same day as Gettysburg. So, after Carlisle was settled in 1751, the Carlisle Barracks military post was established nearby in 1757 and had an antebellum United States Army Cavalry School. By June of 1863, the barracks cavalry had been withdrawn to Harrisburg. Okay.
27th of June, 1863, Confederate Lieutenant General Richard Ewell's 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia. Damn. It stopped at Carlisle en route to Harrisburg and gathered supplies, forage, and find some food from the populace. Ewell, as well as some of his...
Fucking preacher.
Ewell, as well as some of his officers, had been stationed at Carlisle Barracks prior to the Civil War when they were still members of the United States Army. Oh. He paused in Carlisle while sending his cavalry under Brigadier General Albert Jenkins towards the Susquehanna River and Harrisburg. After resting much of his infantry overnight, Ewell moved northward in his quest to seize the state capital. He's like, you can go get Gettysburg. I'm going to the state capital, baby.
Yeah, that was Harrisburg, though.
Still is.
He won't make it. After the Confederates left in response to an order from Lee to concentrate near Gettysburg, Carlisle was reoccupied by Major General Baldy Smith of the Union and a small contingent of the New York and Pennsylvania militia from the Department of Susquehanna, dispatched by the department commander Major General Darius Couch. 32nd and 33rd Pennsylvania Volunteer Militia, Landis's Philadelphia Militia Artillery Battery, and a company of the 1st New York Cavalry formed Smith's Force there.
Wow.
Smiths.
Late afternoon, July 1st, 1863. Jeb Stuart led 2 brigades of cavalry at the end of their raid into Maryland and Pennsylvania. He did this to Carlisle to take a look for supplies and to attempt to ascertain the whereabouts of Ewell's troops.
This dude just got Stuart's been wrong.
He's been everywhere.
I've been through the east on a horse with no name.
A 3rd Brigade under Wade Hampton remained behind in York County to guard a train of 125 captured federal supply wagons. Instead of finding Ewell, Stuart encountered Smith's militiamen of the north. Despite having a large numerical advantage, Stuart's troops, who were too exhausted from a month in the campaign, to attack the town outright. They're like, dude, we finally found what we're looking for, and we don't know what to do with it.
Shit.
So Stuart initially feared that the enemy troops were veterans from the Army of the Potomac. He was like,
Well, after learning that Smith's men were only militia, Stuart sent Major General Fitzhugh Lee into Carlisle with a white flag telling Smith to either evacuate the town or to clear out the women and children. Smith replied that he had already done the latter and refused to surrender. So these women and children are gone. Let's have at it.
He's like, what women and children?
Right. Stuart's horse artillery under Captain James Breathed then began bombarding the town. After shelling Carlisle for several hours, Stuart received word that fighting had broken out to the southwest at Gettysburg between the main armies. He's oh, shit. Unable to take the town by force, he disengaged, having ordered his troops to set on fire the Carlisle barracks. His troops started moving towards the fighting at Gettysburg about 1 a.m. on July 2nd, 1863.
Oh, jeez.
In addition to minimal Union and Confederate casualties, a lumber yard and the town gas works were destroyed after being set fire. What the hell's a gas work? However, Stuart's delay at Carlisle impacted his ability to rendezvous with Lee's main army, though.
Wow.
Dude, Stuart has been just such a failure these last few weeks.
What's going on?
Gettysburg takes place July 1st to the 3rd. And in and around the town of Gettysburg, obviously, the battle involved the largest number of casualties of the entire war and is often described as the war's turning point, with the aforementioned siege of Vicksburg happening at the same time. Shortly after the Army of Northern Virginia won a major victory over the Army of the Potomac at the Battle of Chancellorsville a couple of months ago, General Robert E. Lee decided upon a second invasion of the North, the first which was unsuccessful when they lost the old bloody Battle of Antietam, which to this point I think is the bloodiest battle.
Yes, on American soil.
Right. So Gettysburg about to shatter that.
Invading the North would upset the Union's plans for the summer campaigning season, possibly reduce the pressure on the besieged Confederate garrison at Vicksburg.
Nope.
The invasion would allow the Confederates to live off the bounty of rich northern farms while giving war-ravaged Virginia a much-needed rest. Yeah, Virginia was getting messed up. In addition, General Lee's 72,000-man army could threaten Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, and possibly strengthen the growing peace movement in the North. Oh, the peace, yeah.
So they want them to basically say, I surrender and we're done with this war because we're getting our asses kicked.
You can have Confederates and we'll be the Union.
Yeah. Pretty much. Well, thus, on June 3rd, Lee's army began to shift northward from Fredericksburg, Virginia, following the death of Stonewall Jackson. Lee reorganized his 2 large corps into 3 new corps, commanded by Lieutenant General James Longstreet with the 1st Corps, Lieutenant General Richard S. Ewell for the 2nd Corps, and Lieutenant General A.P. Hill that commanded the 3rd. Both Ewell and Hill, who had formerly reported to Jackson as division commanders, were new to this level of responsibility. The Cavalry Division remained under Major General Jeb Stuart.
This dude's tired. He's been all over the countryside.
He's been just traveling. He's like, where are you, Lee?
Jeez. Well, the Union Army of the Potomac under Major General Joseph Hooker consisted of 7 infantry corps.
For now.
A cavalry corps and an artillery reserve for a combined strength of more than 100,000 men. The first major action of the campaign took place on the 9th of June between cavalry forces at Brandy Station, which we did, near Culpeper, Virginia. The 9,500 Confederate cavalrymen under Jeb Stuart were surprised by Major General Alfred Pleasanton's combined arms force of 2 cavalry divisions, 8,000 troops, and 3,000 infantry.
Wow.
But Jeb eventually repelled the Union attack.
Yeah, well, that inconclusive battle, the largest predominantly cavalry engagement of the war, proved for the first time that the Union horse soldier was equivalent to his Southern counterpart.
Well, I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, for the first time.
This is a lie. This is such a lie because we've read this sentence with 3 other battles. So remember that one battle was when the cavalry was like the first time that they beat the Southern cavalry?
Well, the Confederate cavalry was their high point. They didn't have anything else. Barely had any artillery.
Couldn't do any artillery, that's for sure.
No Navy.
Right. By mid-June, the Army of Northern Virginia was poised to cross the Potomac and enter Maryland. After defeating the Union garrisons at Winchester and Martinsburg, Ewell's 2nd Corps began crossing the river on June 15th. Hill's and Longstreet's Corps followed on June 24th and 25th. Then Hooker's army pursued them, keeping between Washington, D.C. and Lee's army. The Union crossed the Potomac from June 25th to the 27th, so now they're all going to be right there, man.
Lee gave strict orders for his army to minimize any negative effects on the civilian population. Food, horses, other supplies were generally not seized outright unless a citizen concealed property. Although quartermasters reimbursing northern farmers and merchants with Confederate money, which was virtually worthless, or with equally worthless promissory notes, were not well received. Like, what do you want me to do with this? Various towns, most notably York, Pennsylvania, were required to pay indemnities in lieu of supplies under threat of destruction.
Jeez.
Like, you better give us this shit or we'll just burn it down.
Right. We'll take it, and then we'll ruin your life. During the invasion, the Confederates seized between 40 and nearly 60 African Americans. A few of them were escaped fugitive slaves, but many were free men. All were sent south into slavery under guard.
Oh, wow.
June 26, elements of Major General Jubal Early's division of Ewell's Corps occupied the town of Gettysburg after chasing off newly raised Pennsylvania militia in a series of minor skirmishes. Early laid the borough under tribute, but did not collect any significant supplies. Soldiers burned several railroad cars and a covered bridge and destroyed nearby rails and telegraph lines. It said nobody's getting in and nobody's getting out.
Yep, even Lloyd's. The following morning, Early departed for the adjacent York County. Meanwhile, in a controversial move, General Lee allowed Stuart to take a portion of the Army's cavalry and ride around the east flank of the Union Army.
And this is where he's
never to be seen from again. Lee's orders gave Stuart much latitude. Both generals share the blame for the long absence of Stuart's cavalry, obviously, as well as the failure to assign a more active role to the cavalry left with the army. They're like, what do we do? Like, I don't know.
Jeb's not here.
Take care of the horses. Stuart and his 3 best brigades were absent from the army during the crucial phase of the approach to Gettysburg in the first 2 days of battle. Yeah,
by the time he got there, it didn't mean shit.
Mm-hmm.
June 29th, Lee's army was strung out in an arc from Chambersburg, which is 28 miles northwest of Gettysburg, to Carlisle, which is 30 miles north of Gettysburg, to near Harrisburg and Wrightsville on the Susquehanna River. So they're everywhere. In a dispute over the use of forces defending the Harper's Ferry garrison, Hooker offered his resignation, and Abraham Lincoln and General-in-Chief Henry Halleck, who were looking for an excuse already to rid themselves of him, immediately accepted. They're like, yes.
Yeah.
They replaced Hooker early on the morning of June 28th with Major General George Meade, who was then the commander of the 5th Corps. 3 days before the freaking battle.
Yeah, and he gets all the credit for Gettysburg.
Right. Well, he was, you'll see, he
Right.
did do shit that Hooker definitely wouldn't have done.
He was a decent general. I think he's the last until Ulysses, right?
Yep.
29th of June, General Lee learned that the Army of Potomac had crossed the Potomac. He ordered concentration of his forces around Casstown, located at the eastern base of South Mountain and 8 miles west of Gettysburg. South Mountain, huh? June 30th, while part of Hill's Corps was in Cashtown, one of Hill's brigades was North Carolinians under Brigadier General J. Johnston Pettigrew. They ventured toward Gettysburg. In his memoirs, Major General Henry Heth, Pettigrew's division commander, claimed that he sent Pettigrew to search for supplies in town, especially shoes.
They need them shoes. Well, when Pettigrew's men approached Gettysburg on June 30th, they noticed Union cavalry under Major General John Buford arriving south of town, so they're getting there together.
Oh, wow.
Pettigrew returned to Cashtown without engaging them. They're like, oh, shit.
You ain't kidding.
Well, when he told Hill and Heth what he had seen, neither general believed that there was a substantial Union force in or near the town, suspecting that it had only been Pennsylvania militia. Despite Lee's order to avoid a general engagement until his entire army was concentrated, Hill decided to mount a significant reconnaissance in force the following morning to determine the size and strength of the enemy force in his front. About 5 a.m. Wednesday, July 1st, 2 brigades of Heth's division advanced to Gettysburg. And there it is.
Army of Potomac, initially under Hooker, now Meade replaced Hooker in command on 28th of June, which we just said, consisted of more than 100,000 men. The 1st Corps, commanded by Major General John F. Reynolds, with divisions commanded by Brigadier General Wadsworth, Brigadier General Robinson, and Brigadier General Abner Doubleday.
Oh, Doubleday.
2nd Corps, commanded by Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, had Brigadier General Caldwell, Gibbon, and Hayes with them. 3rd Corps, commanded by Major General Daniel Sickles. He also had Major General David Birney and Major General Andrew Humphreys on his side. Moving on to the 5th Corps. 4th Corps is like, we don't want to be involved.
Right. No, thank you.
All right. 5th Corps, commanded by Major General George Sykes. He was with Meade until the 28th.
Well, that was Meade's
Right.
corps until they got promoted.
Okay, yeah. With divisions with Brigadier Generals James Barnes, Romine Ayres, and Samuel Crawford by his side. Moving on to the 6th Corps, commanded by Major General John Sedgwick. He had Brigadier General Horatio Wright, Brigadier General Albion Howe, and Major General John Newton. Moving on to the 9th Corps, or the 11th Corps. Wow, what happened to the rest? Commanded by Major General Oliver Otis Howard. He had Brigadier General Francis Barlow, Brigadier General Adolf von Steinrock, and Major General Karl Schurz. Well, they got
That's the Germans.
German. Yeah. Moving on to the 12th Corps, commanded by Major General Henry Slocum. We've heard of him. He had Brigadier General Alpheus Williams and John Geary. Cavalry Corps, commanded by Major General Alfred Pleasanton, with Brigadier General John Buford, David Gregg, and Hudson Kilpatrick. Artillery Reserve, commanded by Brigadier General Robert O. Tyler. Preeminent artillery officer at Gettysburg was Brigadier General Henry Hunt, Chief Artillery's on Meade's staff. So, yeah, he's bringing his own campaign. During advance on Gettysburg, Reynolds was in operational command on the left or advanced wing of the Army, consisting of the 1st, 3rd, and the 11th Corps. Many other Union units, not part of the Army of the Potomac, were actively involved in Gettysburg campaign as well, but not directly involved in the Battle of Gettysburg.
Yeah, the battles leading up to it and all that.
These included portions of the Union.
Oh, there's your 4th Corps you wondered about.
Militia and they're tired. The militia and state troops of the Department of the Susquehanna and various garrisons, also including that of Harper's Ferry, which we did.
Yes, sir. In reaction to the death of Jackson after Chancellorsville, we already said Lee organized his army from 2 infantry corps to 3.
Yes, this is
that's all he has,
right.
dude. The 1st Corps, commanded by James Longstreet, with divisions commanded by Major Generals Lafayette McLaws, George Pickett, and John Bell Hood. 2nd Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Richard Ewell, with divisions commanded by Major Generals Jubal Early, Edward Johnson, and Robert Rhodes. 3rd Corps was commanded by Lieutenant General A.P. Hill, with divisions commanded by Major Generals Richard Anderson, Henry Heth, and Dorsey Pender. And the Cavalry Division, which we know Jeb Stuart runs that, but he's got brigades commanded by Wade Hampton, Fitzhugh Lee, Beverly Robertson, Albert Jenkins, William E. Grumble Jones, John M. Bowden, and Colonel John R. Chambliss. Holy shit.
Nice. Anticipating that the Rebs would march on Gettysburg from the west on the morning of the 1st of July, General Buford laid out his defenses on 3 ridges west of town: Her Ridge, McPherson Ridge, and Seminary Ridge. These were appropriate terrain for delaying action by a small cavalry division against superior Confederate infantry forces, meant to buy time awaiting the arrival of Union infantrymen who could occupy the strong defensive positions south of town at Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, and Culp's Hill. Buford understood that if the cavalry would gain control of these heights, Meade's army would have difficulty dislodging them. Yeah, anybody on top of a hill can do some damage.
Right. Well, Heft's division of the Confederates advanced with 2 brigades forward, commanded by Brigadier Generals James Archer and Joseph Davis. They proceeded easterly in columns along the Chambersburg Pike, 3 miles west of town, about 7:30 a.m. July 1st. 2 brigades met light resistance from vedettes of Union cavalry and deployed into line. According to lore, the Union soldier to fire the first shot of the battle was Lieutenant Marcellus Jones. Eventually, Heth's men encountered dismounted troopers of Colonel William Gamble's cavalry brigade. Marcellus Jones, did he die? Think he did?
He had to.
Well, this guy, he didn't.
Well,
Died in 1900.
Look at that. 37 years later.
Nice. Good for him, dude.
1830 he was born. He's 70 years old.
Proud, I don't know if it was just pencil and fired a shot at an officer on a white or light gray horse. Good for him. Well, that's a trivia question.
Right. The dismounted troops resisted stoutly, delaying the Confederate advance, with most firing their breech-loading Sharps carbines from behind fences and trees. Small number of troops had other carbine models. A small minority of historians have written that some troopers had Spencer repeating carbines or Spencer repeating rifles, but most sources disagree.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think there was.
I don't know.
Still, by 10:20 a.m., the Confederates had pushed the Union cavalrymen east to McPherson Ridge when the vanguard of the 1st Corps under Major General John Reynolds finally arrived. North of the Pike, Davis gained a temporary success against the Brigadier General Lysander Cutler's brigade, but was repelled with heavy losses in inaction around an unfinished railroad bed cut in the ridge.
South of the Pike, Archer's brigade assaulted through Herbst, also known as McPherson's Woods. The Union Iron Brigade under Brigadier General Solomon Meredith enjoyed initial success against Archer, capturing several hundred men, including Archer himself.
Uh-oh.
General Reynolds was shot and killed early in the fighting while Reynolds, dude, he had
pretty big part in this war so far. He was shot and killed early in the fighting while directing troop and artillery replacements just to the east of the woods. Shelby Foote wrote that the Union cause lost a man considered by many to be the best general in the Army at this point. Yeah, dude. Reynolds was below. That's like Jackson. That's their Jackson.
All right. Major General Abner Doubleday assumed command. He's like, this is my time. Fighting at the Chambersburg Pike area lasted until about 12:30 p.m. It resumed again at around 2:30 after everybody had lunch, took their shit, and a little power nap, and ready to roll again. When Heth's entire division engaged, adding the brigade of Pettigrew and Colonel John Brockenborough, they were like, we're here. As Pettigrew's North Carolina Brigade came online, they flanked the 19th Indiana and drove the Iron Brigade back. The 26th North Carolina, the largest regiment in the Army with 839 men, lost heavily, leaving the first day's fight with around 212 men.
Leaving with 212.
Right.
Wow.
By the end of the 3-day battle, they had about 152 men standing. The highest casualty percentage of one battle of any regiment, north or south. These dudes lost 80% of their freaking army.
Yeah. Slowly, the Iron Brigade of the Union was pushed out of the woods towards Seminary Ridge. A.P. Hill added Major General William Dorsey Pender's division to the assault, and the First Corps was driven back through the grounds of the Lutheran Seminary and Gettysburg streets.
Oh, shit.
As the fighting to the west proceeded, 2 divisions of Ewell's Second Corps, marching west towards Cashtown in accordance with Lee's order for the Army to concentrate in that vicinity, they turned south on the Carlisle and Harrisburg roads towards Gettysburg. They turned south on the Carlisle and Harrisburg roads towards Gettysburg, while the Union 11th Corps raced north on the Baltimore Pike and Taneytown Road. By early afternoon, the Union line ran in a semicircle west, north, and northeast of Gettysburg.
Oh.
So, west, north, northeast. So not quite to the east. So
Well. However, though, the Union did not have enough troops. Cutler, whose brigade was deployed north of Chambersburg Pike, had his right flank in the air. The leftmost division of the 11th Corps was unable to deploy in time to strengthen the line. So Doubleday was forced to throw in reserve brigades to salvage his line. Around 2 p.m., the Confederate 2nd Corps Division under Major General Robert Rhodes and Jubal Early assaulted and outflanked the Union. The Union 1st and the 6th, 11th Corps positioned north and northwest of town. Outflanking these guys.
The Confederate brigades of Colonel Edward O'Neill and Brigadier General Alfred Iverson, AI, suffered severe losses assaulting the 1st Corps Division of Brigadier General John Robinson, which was south of Oak Hill. Early's division profited from a blunder by Brigadier General Francis Barlow when he advanced his 11th Corps Division to Bloker's Knoll, directly north of town and now known as Barlow's Knoll. Fitting. This represented a salient in the Corps' line susceptible to attack from multiple sides. And Early's troops overran Barlow's division, which constituted the right flank of the Union Army's position. Barlow was wounded and captured in the attack. Breaking down, dude.
Break it down. As Union positions collapsed both north and west of town, Howard ordered a retreat on the high ground south of town at the Cemetery Hill, where he had left a division of Brigadier Generals Adolph von Steuer in reserve. Steinwehr. Major General Winfield Hancock assumed command of the battlefield. Sent by Meade when he heard that Reynolds had been moited. Hancock, commander of the 2nd Corps and Meade's most trusted subordinate, was ordered to take command of the field and determine whether Gettysburg was an appropriate place for a major battle.
I don't think you have a freaking choice, dude.
Yeah, I don't think you have a choice. Hancock told Howard, I think this is the strongest position by nature upon us to fight a battle that I ever saw.
Oh, yeah, it sure would be. Well, when Howard agreed, Hancock concluded this discussion. He says, very well, sir. I select this as the battlefield. Hancock's determination had a morale-boosting effect on the retreating Union soldiers, but he played no direct tactical role on the first day.
Right.
General Lee understood the defensive potential to the Union if they held this high ground. He sent orders to Ewell at Cemetery Hill to be taken if practicable. Ewell, who had previously served under Jackson, a general well known for issuing peremptory orders, determined such an assault was not practicable and thus did not attempt it.
Right.
This decision is considered by historians to be a great missed opportunity because he probably could have taken it.
Most likely at that point in time. Wow. Moving on, though, as it is, first day, Gettysburg, more significant than simply a prelude to the bloody second and third days. This ranks as the 23rd biggest battle of the war by number of troops engaged.
That's just the first day.
About 1/4 of Meade's army, 22,000 men, and 1/3 of Lee's army, with 27,000 men, were engaged in this battle.
Wow. Well, throughout the evening of July 1st and the morning of July 2nd, most of the remaining infantry of both armies arrived on the field, including the Union 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 12th Corps. 2 of Longstreet's divisions were on the road, which was Brigadier General George Pickett. He had begun a 22-mile march from Chambersburg, where Brigadier General Evander McLaw, or M-Law, had begun the march from Guilford. Both arrived late in the evening. Law completed his 28-mile march in only 11 hours. Damn. The Union line ran from Culp's Hill southeast of the town, northwest of the Cemetery Hill just south of town, then south for nearly 2 miles along Cemetery Ridge, terminating just north of Little Round Top.
Uh-oh.
Dude, freaking 2 miles.
You ain't kidding. Most of the 12th Corps was on Culp's Hill. The remnants of the 1st and 11th Corps defended Cemetery Hill. 2nd Corps covered most of the northern half of Cemetery Ridge, and the 3rd Corps was ordered to take up a position to its flank. The shape of the Union line is popularly described as a fish hook. Right. Up. Yeah. Perfect. The Confederate line paralleled the Union line about 1 mile to the west on Seminary Ridge, ran east through the town, then curved southeast to a point opposite of Culp's Hill. Thus, the Union Army had interior lines, while the Confederates were nearly 5 miles long.
Holy shit. Holy shit, dude.
It's ridiculous.
Lee's battle plan for July 2nd called for a general assault of Meade's positions. On the right, Longstreet's 1st Corps was to position itself to attack the Union left flank, facing northeast to straddle the Emmitsburg Road and to roll up the Union line. The attack sequence was to begin with Major Generals John Bell Hood's and Lafayette McLaw's divisions, followed by Major General Richard Anderson's division of Hill's 3rd Corps. On the left, Lee instructed Ewell to position his 2nd Corps to attack Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill when he heard the gunfire from Longstreet's assault, preventing Meade from shifting troops to bolster his left. Said, you hear these shots, you attack. This guy can't send reinforcements.
Right. Just everybody's got to fight and defend their own little areas. It's crazy. If you watch the movie Gettysburg, it's pretty much like that.
Well, I'm hoping it would be.
Though it does not appear in either his or Lee's official report, Ewell claimed years later that Lee had changed the order to simultaneously attack, calling for only a diversion to be turned into a full-scale attack if a favorable opportunity presented itself, which is kind of smart. Lee's plan, however, was based on faulty intelligence, exacerbated by Stuart's continued absence from the battlefield. Though Lee personally reconnoitered his left during the morning, he did not visit Longstreet's position on the Confederates' right because he trusted Longstreet. He knows he's got that. It'll probably make Longstreet pissed. You see him, really? You really coming up to my
here?
Shouldn't you
visit?
Right. Shouldn't you be somewhere else?
Go to AP Hill and the other guy Ewell. Those two don't even know what they're doing. I've been doing this shit since the beginning.
Better yet, why don't you go find Jeb Stuart, will you?
Right. Where the hell's he at?
Jeez. Even so, Lee rejected suggestions that Longstreet move beyond Meade's left and attack the Union flank, which he should have done, capturing the supply trains and effectively blocking Meade's escape route. I think he should have done that. That should have been Jeb Stuart's plan.
Right. Well, Lee did not issue orders for an attack until 11 a.m. Around noon, General Anderson's advancing troops were discovered by General Sickles' outposts and the 3rd Corps, upon which Longstreet's 1st Corps was to form, which did not get into position until 1 p.m. Jeez, what the hell are they doing?
Right.
Hood and McLaws, after their long march, were not yet in position to not launch their attacks until just after 4 and 5 p.m. respectively.
Jeez,
dude.
Why? Everybody knew what was going on.
It takes a long time to get 10,000 troops situated.
Jeez, Longstreet's left division, under Major General Lafayette McLaw's advance, they unexpectedly found Major General Daniel Sickles' 3rd Corps directly in their path. Sickles had been dissatisfied with the position assigned to him on the southern end of the Cemetery Ridge.
Oh, poor guy.
Seeing ground better suited for artillery positions 1/2 a mile to the west, centered at Sherfy's Farm's peach orchard. He violated orders and advanced his corps to the slightly higher ground along the Emmitsburg Road, moving away from Cemetery Ridge. The new line ran from Devil's Den northwest to the peach orchard, then northeast along the Emmitsburg Road to south of the Cadore Farm.
This created an untenable salient at the peach orchard, of course.
Right.
Brigadier General Andrew Humphrey's division in position along the Emmitsburg Road, and Major General David Birney's division to the south were subject to attacks from 2 sides and were spread out over a longer front than their small corps could defend effectively. Wow. Confederate artillery was ordered to open fire at 3 p.m. After failing to attend a meeting at this time of Meade's corps commanders, Meade rode to Sickles' position and demanded an explanation of the situation.
He said, what the hell's going on here?
Well, knowing a Confederate attack was imminent and a retreat would be endangered, Meade refused Sickles' offer to withdraw. He said, no, you stay here and you attack.
You did this.
You did that, dude.
This is where you die, bud.
Right. And,
Wow.
spoil.
Meade was forced to send 20,000 reinforcements.
He's like, you idiot.
The entire
Dude.
5th Corps, Brigadier General John Caldwell's division of the 2nd Corps, most of the 12th Corps, and he did portions of the newly arrived 6th Corps. Hood's division moved more to the east than intended, losing its alignment with Emmitsburg Road, attacking Devil's Dan and Little Round Top. McLaws, coming in on Hood's left, drove multiple attacks into nearly thinly stretched 3rd Corps in the wheat field and overwhelmed them to Sherfy's Peach Orchard. McLaw's attack eventually reached Plum Run Valley, the Valley of Death, before they were beaten back by the Pennsylvania Reserves. Look at the Pennsylvania Reserves, like, look, I'll do your job.
Right.
Division of the 5th Corps, these guys are. They were moving down from the Little Round Top.
All right, well, the 3rd Corps was virtually destroyed as a combat unit in this battle, and Sickles' leg was amputated after it was shattered by a cannonball. Caldwell's division was destroyed piecemeal in the wheat field. Anderson's division from the south, coming from McLaw's left and starting forward around 6 p.m., reached the crest of Cemetery Ridge but could not hold the position in the face of counterattacks from the 2nd Corps, which included an almost suicidal bayonet charge by the 1st Minnesota Regiment against the Confederate Brigade, ordered in desperation by Hancock to buy time for reinforcements to arrive. Like, you need to go down there and do something, guys. Sorry.
Go. We don't have time to sit there and watch you load your rifle.
Right.
As fighting raged on in the wheat field in Devin's Den, Colonel Strong Vincent of the 5th Corps had a precarious hold on the Little Top Round. On the Little Round Top.
You also called Devil's Den Devin's Den, by the way.
This was an important hill at the extreme left of the Union line. His brigade of 4 relatively small regiments was able to resist repeated assaults by Law's brigade of Hood's division. General Meade's chief engineer, Brigadier General Governor Warren, had realized the importance of this battle and dispatched Vincent's brigade and an artillery battery that was the 140th New York to occupy Little Round Top merely minutes before Hood's troops arrived. The defense of Little Round Top with a bayonet charge by the 20th Maine, ordered by Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, and possibly led down the slope by Lieutenant Holman Melcher. This was one of the most fabled episodes in the Civil War and propelled Chamberlain into prominence after the war. Yeah.
Sure did. Well, Ewell interpreted his orders as calling only for a cannonade. His 32 guns, along with A.P. Hill's 55 guns, engaged in a 2-hour artillery barrage at extreme range that had little effect. Finally, 6 o'clock came around, and Ewell sent orders to each of his division commanders to attack the Union lines in his front. Major General Edward Allegheny Johnson's division had contemplated an assault on Culp's Hill, but they were still a mile away and had Red Rock Creek to cross. The few possible crossings would make significant delays.
Because of this, only 3 of Johnson's 4 brigades moved to the attack. Most of the Hill's defenders, the Union 12th Corps, had been sent to the left to defend against Longstreet's attacks, leaving only a brigade of New Yorkers under Brigadier General George Greene behind strong, newly constructed defensive wakes.
Oh, at least got those.
With reinforcements from the 1st and 11th Corps, Greene's men held off the Confederate attackers, though giving up some of the lower earthworks on the lower part of Culp's Hill. That's fine.
You got to do what you got to do, man.
That's fine.
Well, Jubal Early was similarly unprepared when he ordered Harry Hayes's and Isaac Avery's brigades to attack the Union 11th Corps position on East Cemetery.
How?
Once started, fighting was fierce. Colonel Andrew Harris of the 2nd Union Brigade, 1st Division, 11th Corps, came under a withering attack, losing half his men. Avery was wounded early on, but the Confederates reached the crest of the hill and entered the Union breastworks, capturing 1 or 2 batteries. 1 or 2? That's one's enough.
Right.
Seeing he was not supported on his right, Hayes withdrew.
No.
His right was to be supported by Robert Rhodes's division, but Rhodes, like Early and Johnson, had not been ordered up in preparation for the attack.
Why?
Lee's screwing up right now, man.
Well, he had twice as far to travel as Early did. By the time he came in contact with Union skirmish line, Early's troops had been already withdrawn.
Wow.
Jeb Stuart and his 3 cavalry brigades arrived.
Hey, look, everybody's like, where the hell you been, you stupid bastard?
You're like, oh, Lee, I found him.
What's going on here?
What happened here? Well, I wish you were here.
Jeez.
Wow. He came around noon and had no role in the second day's battle at all because he was resting. Brigadier General Wade Hampton's brigade fought a minor engagement with newly promoted 23-year-old Brigadier General George Armstrong Custer's
We know who that is.
Michigan cavalry near Hunterstown to the northeast of Gettysburg.
Oh, Georgie. Lee wished to renew the attack on Friday the 3rd. using the same basic plan as the previous day. Longstreet would attack the left, Ewell attack Culp's Hill. However, before Longstreet was ready, Union 12th Corps troops started a dawn artillery bombardment against the Confederates on Culp Hill in an effort to regain a portion of their lost works.
Right.
The Confederates attacked, and their second fight for Culp's Hill ended around 11 a.m. After some 7 hours of bitter combat.
Wow.
Holy shit. The Union line was intact and held more strongly than before, they say.
My goodness.
Uh-oh.
Well, then Lee was forced to change his very plans.
Yeah, you better.
Longstreet would command Pickett's Virginia division of his own First Corps, plus 6 brigades from Hill's Corps, and attack on the Union Second Corps position at the right center of the Union line on Cemetery Ridge. Prior to the attack, all the artillery the Confederacy would bring to bear on the Union positions would bombard and weaken the enemy's line, they hoped.
Hopefully, right?
Much had been made over the years of General Longstreet's objection to General Lee's plan. In his memoirs, Longstreet states that he told Lee that there were not enough men to assault the strong left center at the Union line by McLaws and Hood's divisions, reinforced by Pickett's brigades. He's like, this just simply not enough.
Well, he thought the attack would be repulsed, and a counterattack would put Union forces between the Confederates and the Potomac. Longstreet wrote that he said it would take a minimum of 30,000 men to attack successfully, as well as close coordination with other Confederate forces.
Right.
He noted that only about 13,000 men were left in the selected divisions after the first 2 days of fighting.
Jeez, that's not
They would have to walk a mile under heavy artillery and long-range musketry fire. Longstreet states that he further asked Lee the strength of a column. He stated 15,000. He being Lee. Opinion was then expressed by Longstreet, by me, he says, I'm assuming, that the 15,000 men who could make successful assault over that field had never been arrayed for battle, but he was impatient of listening and tired of talking, and nothing was left but to proceed.
He knew he was screwed, and they were
You
here.
gotta do something, dude. And we're not backing down.
Around 1 p.m., 150 to 170 Confederate guns began an artillery bombardment that was probably the largest of the war. In order to save valuable ammunition for the infantry attack that they knew would follow, the Army of Potomac's artillery, under command of Brigadier General Henry Hunt, at first did not return any fire. After waiting about 15 minutes, about 80 Union cannons opened fire. The Army of Northern Virginia from the south was critically low on artillery ammo, and the cannonade did not significantly affect the Union position at all, because they never do. They're so stupid. Waste.
Well, let's see. Now here is Lee making a big blunder, because he believed that after Confederate attacks on both the left and right flanks of the Union lines on July 2nd, Meade would concentrate his defenses there to detriment of his center. However, the night of July 2nd, Meade correctly predicted to General Gibbon, after a council war, that Lee would attack the center of his lines the following morning and reinforce that area with additional soldiers and artillery.
Clearly, it's common sense.
Right. The infantry assault was preceded by a massive artillery bombardment that was meant to soften up the Union defense and silence artillery, but it was largely ineffective.
Damn right it was. There goes a good one. Pickett's charge was planned for 3 Confederate divisions commanded by Major General George Pickett, Brigadier General Pettigrew, and Major General Isaac Trimble, consisting of troops from Lieutenant Longstreet's First Corps and Lieutenant General A.P. Hill's Third Corps. Pettigrew commanded brigades from Major General Henry Heth's Old Division under Colonel Burkett Fry, which is Archer's Brigade, Colonel James Marshall, Pettigrew's Brigade, Brigadier General Joseph R. Davis, Colonel John Brockenbrough, Trimble commanding Major General Dorsey Pender's division, had the brigades of Brigadier General Alfred Scales, temporarily commanded by William Lee Lawrence. That's a hell of a way to spell Lawrence.
All right.
And James H. Lane. 2 brigades from Major General Richard Anderson's division, which is Hill's Corps, were to support the attack on the right flank. Brigadier General Cadmus Wilcox and Colonel David Lang, also from Perry's brigade.
Okay, a lot going on there. The target of the Confederate assault was the center of the Union of the Second Corps, commanded by Major General Winfield Hancock. Directly in the center was the division of Brigadier General John Gibbon, with the brigades of Brigadier General William Harrow, Colonel Norman J. Hall, and Brigadier General Alexander Webb. To the north of this position were brigades from the division of Brigadier General Alexander Hayes, and to the south was Major General Abner Doubleday's division of the First Corps, including the 2nd Vermont Brigade of Brigadier General George Stannard and the 121st Pennsylvania, under the command of Colonel Chapman Biddle.
Hey.
Meade's headquarters were just behind the 2nd Corps line in the small house owned by the widow Lydia Leicester.
Yeah.
Lydia Leicester.
Well, the very specific objective of the assault has been the source of historical controversy. Traditionally, the copse of trees on Cemetery Ridge has been cited as the visual landmark for the attacking force. Historical treatments such as the 1993 film Gettysburg continue to popularize this view, which originated in the work of Gettysburg battlefield historian John Bachelder in the 1880s. However, though, recent scholarship, including published works by some Gettysburg National Military Park historians, has suggested that Lee's goal was actually Ziegler's Grove on the Cemetery Hill, a more prominent and highly visible grouping of trees about 300 yards north of the Copse.
Yeah.
It's probably one of them.
Right. The much debated theory suggests that Lee's general plan for the second day attacks, which was the seizure of Cemetery Hill, had not changed on the third day, and the attacks on July 3rd were also aimed at securing the hill and the network of roads it commanded. The copse of trees, currently a prominent landmark, was under 10 feet high in 1863. That's it. Only visible to a portion of the attacking columns from certain parts of the battlefield. From the beginning of the planning, things went awry for the Confederates.
Sure it did. Pickett's division had not been used yet at Gettysburg. A.P. Hill's health became an issue, and he did not participate in selecting which of his troops were to be used for the charge. Why, I'm sure he can still think.
Right.
Some of Hill's corps had fought lightly on the 1st of July and not at all on 2nd of July. However, troops that had done heavy fighting on the 1st of July ended up making the charge.
What a bunch of idiots.
Right. Although this all is known popular history as Pickett's charge, overall command was given to James Longstreet, and Pickett was one of his divisional commanders. It was. Lee did tell Longstreet that Pickett's fresh division should lead the assault, so the name is appropriate, although some recent historians have used the name Pickett Pettigrew Trimble Assault, or less frequently Longstreet's Assault. Never heard of that.
No.
So they can fairly distribute the credit or the blame, which is mostly blame.
Yes.
No credit to this.
Right. With Hill sideline, Pettigrew's and Trimble's division were delegated to Longstreet's authority as well. Thus, Pickett's name has been lent to a charge in which he commanded 3 out of the 11 brigades while under the supervision of his corps commander throughout.
Right.
So it's not even his charge.
No.
Pickett's men were almost exclusively from Virginia, with the other divisions consisted of troops from North Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. The supporting troops under Wilcox and Lang were from Alabama and Florida. In conjunction with the infantry assault, Lee planned a cavalry action in the Union rear. Major General Jeb Stuart led his cavalry division to the east, prepared to exploit Lee's hoped-for breakthrough by attacking the Union rear and disrupting his lines of communication and retreat along the Baltimore Pike.
Okay.
So now Stuart's finally getting some action in.
All right. Well, Lee planned for an early start. It took all morning to arrange the infantry assault force, though.
Jeez.
Neither Lee's nor Longstreet's headquarters sent orders to Pickett to have his division. Why? Did you guys?
Hey, we're doing this assault, but we're not going to let you know when to put you guys on the battlefield.
Wait, they're not in the battlefield? They didn't get,
What do you mean? You didn't tell them Longstreet? I thought you were supposed to tell them.
Wow. Historian Jeffrey D. Wirt blames oversight on Longstreet, describing it either as a misunderstanding of Lee's oral order or a mistake. How? These guys are like in sync with each other.
Should be.
Some of the many criticisms of Longstreet's Gettysburg performance by the postbellum Lost Cause authors cite this failure as evidence that Longstreet deliberately undermined Lee's plan for the battle.
Maybe he did.
Was there some kind of a little drama there?
Must have been.
Meanwhile, on the far right end of the Union line, a 7-hour battle raged for the control of Culp's Hill.
7 hours.
Lee's intent to synchronize his offensive across the battlefield, keeping Meade from concentrating his numerically superior forces, but the assaults were poorly coordinated, and Major General Edward Johnson's attacks against Culp's Hill petered out just as Longstreet's cannonade began. So bad, dude. How can you go to your biggest battle and then just fall apart? That happens usually it's the Union doing
Right. Well, I don't know. The Union
They've been better.
Stepped up on the bigger battles.
Right.
But,
What the hell?
well, the infantry charge was preceded by what Lee would hope to be a powerful and well-concentrated cannonade of the Union center, destroying the Union artillery batteries that could defeat the assault and demoralizing the Union infantry. But a combination of inept artillery leadership and a defective equipment doomed the barrage from the beginning. Longstreet's corps artillery chief, Colonel Edward Porter Alexander, had effective command of the field. Lee's artillery chief, Brigadier General William Pendleton, played little role other than to obstruct the effective placement of artillery from the other two corps. Despite Alexander's efforts, then there was insufficient concentration of Confederate fire on the objective.
So stupid.
What the hell are these guys doing?
The 3rd of July bombardment was likely the largest of the war, with hundreds of cannons from both sides firing along lines for 1 to 2 hours. Starting around 1 p.m., Confederate guns numbered between 150 and 170 and fired from a line over 2 miles long. Starting with the south at Peach Orchard and running roughly parallel to the Emmitsburg Road. Confederate Brigadier General Evander Law wrote, "The cannonade in the center presented one of the most magnificent battle scenes witnessed during the war.
That,
Looking up the valley towards Gettysburg, the hills on either side were capped with with crowns of flame and smoke as 300 guns, about equally divided between the two ridges, vomited their iron hail upon each other.
Despite its ferocity, the fire was mostly ineffectual.
Of course, it always is.
Right. Confederate shells often overshot the infantry front lines, in some cases because of inferior shell fuses that delayed detonation.
Right.
And the smoke covering the battlefield concealed the fact from the gunners. Right, so I don't even know where they're shooting.
Right.
Union Artillery Chief Brigadier General Henry Hunt had only about 80 guns available to conduct counter-battery fire. The geographic features of the Union line had limited areas for the effective gun emplacement. He also ordered that firing cease to conserve ammo, but to fool Alexander, Hunt ordered his cannons to cease fire slowly to create the illusion that they were being destroyed by one by one. Oh, right. So he's like, boom, every so often, stop firing. That way, like, we got one, boys. Wow, look at this.
By the time all of Hunt's cannons ceased fire and still blinded by the smoke from the battle, Alexander fell for Hunt's deception and believed that many of the Union batteries had been destroyed. Hunt had to resist the strong arguments of Hancock, who demanded Union fire to lift the spirits of the infantrymen pinned down by Alexander's bombardment. He's like, don't worry, I got this. Follow me, man. Follow me on this.
We got it.
Even Meade was affected by the artillery. The Leicester house was a victim of frequent overshots, and he had to evacuate with his staff to Powers Hill. The counter-battery fire depleted the northern ammunition stocks, leaving them insufficient time to replenish before a southern assault. For the rest of his life, Hunt always maintained that he had been allowed to do what he'd intended, saved his long-range shells for the attack he knew was coming, then bombard from the Confederate forces with every gun available once they lined up for their advance. Then the charge would never have happened and saved many northern lives. He's like, if they let me do what I want to do,
that Pickett's charge would have never happened. But the first day was hot, or the day was hot, 87 degrees by one account, and humid. And the Confederates suffered under the hot sun and from the Union counter-battery fire as they awaited the order to advance. When Union cannoneers overshot their targets, they often hit the massed infantry waiting in the woods of Seminary Ridge or in the shallow depressions just behind Alexander's guns, causing significant casualties before the charge even began.
So stupid. So dumb.
Well, we all know Longstreet had opposed the charge from the beginning, convinced the charge would fail, which he was ultimately proved correct, and had his own plan that he would have preferred for a strategic movement around the Union left flank.
Oh, in his memoirs, he recalled telling Lee, General, I have been a soldier all my life. I have been with soldiers engaged in fights by couples, by squads, companies, regiments, divisions, and armies, and should know, as well as anyone, what soldiers can do. It is my opinion that no 15,000 men ever arrayed for battle can take that position. Longstreet wanted to avoid personally ordering the charge by attempting to pass the mantle onto Colonel Alexander, telling him that he should inform Pickett at the optimum time to begin the advance, based on his assessment as the Union artillery had been effectively silenced. He's like, how about you? You figure it out, bud. Right. You make the call.
Although he hadn't become aware of such a development, Alexander eventually notified Pickett that he was running dangerously short of ammo, sending the message, if you are coming at all, come at once, or I cannot give you proper support, but the enemy's fire has not slackened at all. At least 18 guns are still firing from the cemetery itself, he says. Pickett then asked Longstreet, General, shall I advance? Longstreet recalled in his memoirs, the effect to speak the order failed, and I could only indicate it by affirmative bow.
He couldn't say anything.
Longstreet made one final attempt to call off the assault. After his encounter with Pickett, he discussed the artillery situation with Alexander and was informed that Alexander did not have full confidence that all the enemy's guns were silenced and that the Confederate ammunition was almost exhausted. Longstreet ordered Alexander to stop Pickett, but the young colonel explained that replenishing his ammunition from the trains in the rear would take over an hour, and this delay would nullify any advantage the previous barrage had given him. The infantry assault went forward without the Confederate artillery close support that had been originally planned. Ooh.
Can't do that.
Could have probably used that.
The entire force that stepped off toward the Union positions at about 2 p.m. comprised about 12,500 men. Although the attack is popularly called a charge, the men marched deliberately in line, prepared to speed up and charge only when they were within a few hundred yards of the enemy. The line consisted of Pettigrew and Trimble on the left, Pickett on the right. The 9 brigades of men stretched over a mile long. The Confederates immediately encountered heavy artillery fire and were slowed by fences in their path. Fire from Lieutenant Colonel Freeman McGilvery's concealed artillery positions north of Little Round Top raked the Confederate right flank. Artillery fire from Cemetery Hill hit the left, while the center faced the cannons of the 2nd Corps with a Union artillery reserve in a second line behind. Dude, they're just getting hammered.
The ground between Seminary Ridge and Cemetery Ridge is slightly undulating, whatever that means, and the advancing troop periodically disappeared from the view of the Union cannoneers while advancing the nearly 3/4 of a mile across open fields to reach the Union line. Holy shit, dude, 3/4 of a mile.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
As the three Confederate divisions advanced, awaiting Union soldiers began shouting, "Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg," in reference to the disastrous Union. I was just going to say, it reminded me of that.
Right.
The Union advance on the Confederate line during the 1862 Battle of Fredericksburg. If you remember, they were all the Confederates were behind that stone wall, just obliterating the Union.
Crazy shit. Shell and solid shot in the beginning turned to canister and musket fire as the Confederates came within 400 yards of the Union line. At this point, Confederate Union cohesion and morale began to break down. The last shelter before reaching the Union lines lay at 300 yards in the sunken depression of the Emmitsburg Road. Thousands of Confederates took to the ground there and refused to advance any further, many surrendering to Union troops after the battle. Over 2/3 of the initial force may have failed to make the final charge. Damn, dude, that's ridiculous. At contact, the mile-long front had shrunk to less than a half mile.
Wow.
As the men filled in gaps that appeared throughout the line and followed the natural tendency to move away from the flanking fire.
Right. On the left flank of the attack, Brockenbrau's brigade was devastated by artillery fire from Cemetery Hill. They were also subjected to a surprise musket fusillade from 8th Ohio Infantry Regiment. The 160 Ohioans firing from a single line so surprised Brockenbrau's Virginians, who were already demoralized by their losses to artillery fire, that they panicked and fled back to Seminary Ridge, crashing through Trimble's division and causing many of his men to bolt as well.
Oh, my.
The Ohioans followed up with a successful flanking attack on Davis's brigade, which was now the left flank of Pettigrew's division.
The survivors were subjected to increasingly artillery fire from Cemetery Hill. More than 1,600 rounds were fired at Pettigrew's men during their assault. This portion of the assault never advanced much further than the sturdy fence at the Emmitsburg Road. By this time, the Confederates were close enough to be fired on by artillery canister, and Alexander Hayes' division unleashed very effective musketry fire from behind 260 yards of stone wall. Oh, there's that stone wall. With every rifleman of the division lined up as many as 4 deep, exchanging places in line as they fired and then fell back to reload.
Nice.
That's perfect. Look at that.
In the process, deafening everybody that they're shooting next to. They were at once enveloped in a dense cloud of smoke and dust. Arms, heads, blankets, guns, and knapsacks were thrown and tossed into the clear air. A moan went up from the field, distinctly to be heard amid the storm of battle. So says Lieutenant Colonel Franklin Sawyer from the 8th Ohio.
Man. Trimble's division of 2 brigades followed Pettigrew's, but made poor progress. Confusing orders from Trimble caused Lane to send only 3.5 of his North Carolina regiments forward.
3.5?
Right. Renewed fire from the 8th Ohio and onslaught of Hayes riflemen prevented most of these men from getting past the Emmitsburg Road. If you guys ever watched the movie Gettysburg, this is very, they do this one in depth.
Right.
It's crazy. Scales' North Carolina brigade, led by Colonel William L.J. Lawrence, started with a heavier disadvantage. They had lost about 2/3 of their men on the 1st of July.
Wow.
They were also driven back, and Lawrence was wounded. The Union defenders also took casualties, but Hayes encouraged his men by riding back and forth just behind the line, shouting, "Hurrah, boys! We're giving them hell!" 2 horses were shot out from underneath them.
He just gets on another one.
Right.
On the right, he didn't care about his horses, apparently. No feelings whatsoever. On the right
Well,
flank...
he probably lost his original horse a long time ago.
On the right flank, Pickett's Virginians crossed the Emmitsburg Road and wheeled partially to the left to face northeast. They marched in 2 lines led by the brigades of Brigadier General James Kemper on the right, Brigadier General Richard Garnett on the left. Brigadier General Lewis Armistead's brigade followed closely behind them. As the division wheeled to the left, its right flank was exposed to McGilvery's guns and the front of Doubleday's Union Division on Cemetery Ridge. Stannard's Vermont Brigade marched forward, faced north, and delivered withering fire into the rear of Kemper's brigade.
It's ridiculous,
Jeez,
man.
dude.
At about this time, you'd think Lee'd have to be like, dude, we're done.
I don't even know if he's even over here.
At about this time, Hancock, who had been prominent in displaying himself on horseback to his men during the Confederate artillery bombardment, was wounded by a bullet striking the pommel of his saddle, entering his inner right thigh along with the wood fragments and large bent nail.
Holy shit, where the hell did the nail come from? Oh, it must have hit through like the fence or something?
Right. He refused evacuation to the rear until the battle was settled.
Oh, good for him. As Pickett's men advanced, they withstood the defensive fire of first Stannard's brigade, then Harrow's, and then Hall's, before approaching a minor salient in the Union center, a low stone wall taking an 80-yard right-angle turn known afterward as the Angle. It was defended by Brigadier General Alexander Webb's Philadelphia Brigade. Webb placed the 2 remaining guns of the severely wounded Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing's Battery A of the 4th U.S. Artillery
at the front of his line at the stone fence with the 69th and 71st Pennsylvania regiments to defend the fence and the guns. The 2 guns and 940 men could not match the massive firepower that Hayes' division to the right had been able to unleash, though.
Ooh.
So?
Okay, well, at this time, 2 gaps open up in the Union line. The commander of the 71st Pennsylvania ordered his men to retreat when the Confederates came too close to the angle. South of the copse of trees, the men of the 59th New York, which is Hall's brigade, inexplicably bolted to the rear. In the latter case, this left Captain Andrew Cowan and his 1st New York Independent Artillery Battery to face the oncoming infantry.
Jeez.
Assisted personally by Artillery Chief Henry Hunt, Cowan ordered 5 guns to fire double canister simultaneously. The entire Confederate line to his front disappeared. The gap vacated by most of the 71st Pennsylvania, however, was more serious, leaving only a handful of the 71st, 268 men of the 69th Pennsylvania, and Cushing's 2 3-inch rifle guns to receive the 25 to 3,000 men of Garnett and Armistead's brigades from the south as they began to cross the stone fence.
Oh, shit. Well, the Irishmen of the 69th Pennsylvania resisted fiercely in a melee of rifle fire, bayonets, and fists.
Ooh.
Oh, you know they're throwing some fists.
Right.
Webb, who was mortified that the 71st had retreated, brought the 72nd Pennsylvania forward. Initially, the regiment was hesitant to attack, this being due to the regiment not recognizing Webb as a brigadier general because he'd just been recently promoted.
Wow.
However, the 72nd moved forward after realizing their error, helping to plug the gap in the line.
Like, oh, shit. All right.
This guy's giving orders.
All right. During the fight, Lieutenant Cushing was moited as he shouted to his men, 3 bullets striking him in the 3rd in his mouth. The Confederates seized his 2 guns and turned them to face the Union troops. But they had no ammo to fire them. As more Union reinforcements arrived and charged into the breach, the position became untenable, and the Confederates began to slip away individually, with no senior officers remaining to call a formal retreat.
Well, the infantry assault lasted less than an hour. The support and attack by Wilcox and Lang on Pickett's right was never a factor. They did not approach the Union line until after Pickett was defeated, and their advance was quickly broken up by McGilvery's guns and the Vermont Brigade. While the Union lost about 1,500 killed and wounded, the Confederate casualty rate was over 50%. Pickett's division suffered 2,655 casualties, 498 killed, 643 wounded, 833 wounded and captured, and 681 captured unwounded. Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, because they're walking in that open field and watching everybody just get blown to pieces.
Right.
Stupid. Man, these guys. It's the most ridiculous ever seen, man. Wow. That and the Revolutionary War, both the same. Man. Pettigrew's losses are estimated to be about 2,700, with 470 killed, 1,893 wounded, and 337 captured. Trimble's 2 brigades lost 885, 155 killed, 650 wounded, 80 men captured. Wilcox's brigade reports losses of 200. Lang's about 400. Thus, the total losses during the attack were 6,555, of which at least 1,123 Confederates were moited. 4,019 were wounded, and a good number of the injured were also captured. Confederate prisoner totals are difficult to estimate from their reports. Union reports indicated that 3,750 men were captured.
Dude, 1,123 bodies just laying on the battlefield.
Ridiculous. And that's just Confederates.
Right. Well, Union, what? Maybe a couple hundred?
Probably 4 or 5.
Only 1,500 casualties total.
Right.
I doubt that many. The casualties were also high among the commanders of the charge. Trimble and Pettigrew were the most senior casualties of the day. Trimble lost a leg. Pettigrew received a minor wound to the hand, only to die from a bullet to the abdomen, suffered in a minor skirmish during the retreat to Virginia.
Oh, no.
Oh, jeez. In Pickett's division, 26 of the 40 field grade officers, which were majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels, were casualties, 12 killed or mortally wounded, 9 wounded, 4 wounded and captured, and 1 captured. All of his brigade commanders fell. Kemper was wounded seriously, captured by Union soldiers, rescued, and then captured again during the retreat to Virginia. Jeez. Garnett and Armistead were killed. Garnett had a previous leg injury and rode his horse during the charge, despite knowing that conspicuously riding a horse into heavy enemy fire would mean almost certain death.
Yeah, he
said, I got to lead my guys, man.
And that's sad. There were 2 significant cavalry engagements on July 3rd. The first one was coordinated with Pickett's charge, and the standoff may have prevented a disaster for Union infantry. The site of this engagement is now known as the East Cavalry Field. The second engagement was a loss for Union cavalry attacking Confederate infantry. Wow. It has been labeled as a fiasco and featured faulty cavalry tactics. Yeah, the Union wasn't very good on cavalry. They didn't like horses. They're like show horses.
Right.
The site of this engagement is now known as the South Cavalry Field.
Well, because this one they're facing against Stuart and his cavalry division, which was 3 brigades with the assistance of Jenkins' brigade, and they were sent to guard the Confederate left flank. Stuart was also in position to exploit any successes the Confederate infantry, which was Pickett's charge, might achieve on the Cemetery Hill by flanking the Union right and getting behind Union infantry facing the Confederate attack. The cavalry fight took place about 3 miles northeast of Gettysburg at 3 p.m. around the end of the Confederate artillery barrage that preceded Pickett's charge. Stuart's forces collided with Union cavalry, Brigadier General David McMurtry Gregg's division and Custer's brigade from Kilpatrick's division.
Right. The fight evolved into a wild melee of swinging sabers and blazing pistols and carbines. One of Custer's regiments, the 5th Michigan Cavalry, was armed with Spencer repeating rifles, and at least 2 companies from an additional regiment were also armed with the repeaters.
Those repeaters, man.
They get ya. The fight ended in a standoff, as neither side changed positions. However, Gregg and Custer prevented Stuart from gaining the rear of the Union infantry facing Pickett. If he could have got that, that could have been nice.
They would have been screwed. After hearing the news of Union's success against Pickett's charge, Brigadier General Judson Kilpatrick launched a cavalry attack against the infantry position of Longstreet's corps southwest of Big Round Top. The terrain was difficult for a mounted attack because it was rough, heavily wooded, and contained huge boulders, and Longstreet's men were entrenched with artillery support. Brigadier General Elon Farnsworth protested against the futility of such a move, but obeyed orders anyways. Farnsworth was killed in the 4th of 5 unsuccessful attacks, and his brigade suffered significant losses.
Jeez.
Although Kilpatrick was described by at least one Union leader as brave, enterprising, and energetic, incidents such as Farnsworth's charge earned him the nickname of Kill Cavalry.
Oh, all right.
That's not a nickname you want.
No, that's the same picture they show on every frickin' Gettysburg photo.
Sure, they don't have many.
The 2 armies suffered between 46,000 and 51,000 casualties. Union casualties were 23,055. 3,155 moited, 14,531 wounded, 5,369 captured or missing. While Confederate casualties are more difficult to estimate, many authors have referred to as many as 28,000 casualties for the rebels. And Busy and Martin's more recent 2005 work, Regimental Strengths and Losses at Gettysburg, documents 23,231 with 4,708 killed, 12,693 wounded, 5,833 captured or missing. Nearly a third of Lee's general officers were moited, wounded, or captured. The casualties for both sides for the 6-week campaign, according to Sears, were 57,225 men.
Jeez.
Man.
In addition to being the deadliest battle of the war, Gettysburg also had the most generals killed in action. Several generals were also wounded. The Confederacy lost Generals Paul Jones Semmes, William Barksdale, William Dorsey Pender, Richard Garnett, and Lewis Armistead, as well as J. Johnson Pettigrew during the retreat after the battle. Confederate generals who were wounded included Major General John Bell Hood, who lost the use of his left arm, Major General Henry Heth, who received a shot to the head on the first day of battle. Though incapacitated for the rest of the battle, he remarkably survived without long-term injuries. Wow. Credited in part due to his hat stuffed full of paper dispatches.
Hey,
look at that. That's where he got all those little orders from and just stuffed them in his hat. Huh?
Good for him. Wow. Confederate generals James L. Kemper and Isaac R. Trimble were severely wounded during Pickett's charge and captured during the Confederate retreat. Confederate Brigadier General James Archer, in command of the brigade that most likely responsible for killing Reynolds from the north, was taken prisoner shortly after Reynolds' death. In Confederate First Corps, 8 of Longstreet's 14 division and brigade commanders were killed or wounded, including Brigadier General George Anderson and Brigadier General Jerome Robertson, who was wounded.
Well, in Ewell's Second Corps, Brigadier General Isaac Avery was mortally wounded. Brigadier General John Jones was wounded. In Hill's Third Corps, in addition to Pender and Pettigrew being killed, Major General Henry Heth and Colonel Burkett Fry, later Brigadier General, and temporary brigade command were wounded as well. Hill's Third Corps, Brigadier General Alfred Scales and Colonel William Lawrence and temporary brigade command were wounded. In the Confederate Cavalry Division, Brigadier General Wade Hampton and Brigadier General Albert Jenkins were also wounded.
Okay, what did the Union do?
Not many.
Union generals killed were General John Reynolds, Samuel K. Zook, and Stephen H. Weed, as well as Elon Farnsworth, assigned as Brigadier General by Major General Pleasanton based on his nomination, although his promotion was confirmed posthumously. And Strong Vincent, who after being mortally wounded was given a deathbed promotion to Brigadier General. I guess, right? Additional senior officers' casualties included the wounding of Union Generals Dan Sickles, who lost a leg, Francis C. Barlow, Daniel Butterfield, and Winfield Scott Hancock. It's a hell of a name. 5 of 7 brigade commanders in Reynolds' 1st Corps were wounded, in addition to Hancock and Brigadier General John Gibbon being wounded in the 2nd Corps. 3 of the 10 brigade commanders were killed, and 3 were wounded.
Historian Bruce Catton wrote, the town of Gettysburg looked as if some universal moving day had been interrupted by catastrophe. But there was only one documented civilian death during the battle. It was Jenny Wade, also widely known as Jenny. She was 20 years old and was hit by a stray bullet that passed through her kitchen in town while she was making bread.
Oh, that sucks.
Another notable civilian casualty was...
making bread in the middle of a freaking battle.
She was probably a defeat.
All right, I guess you got to eat.
Some of the soldiers or something, I guess. Another notable civilian casualty was John Burns, a 69-year-old veteran of World War XII, the War of 1812,
Oh, shit.
who walked to the front lines on the first day of battle and participated in heavy combat as a volunteer, receiving numerous wounds in the process.
Damn, this dude.
Despite his age and injuries, Burns survived the battle and lived until 1872.
Nice.
Nearly 8,000 had been killed outright. Nearly 8,000 people, men, had been killed outright. These bodies, lying in the hot summer sun, needed to be buried quickly.
Man. Dude, can you imagine?
Just littered, dude.
Everywhere. More than 3,000 horse carcasses were burned in a series of piles south of town. Townsfolk became violently ill from the stench.
Ugh.
Meanwhile, the town of Gettysburg, with a population of 2,400, found itself tasked with taking care of 14,000 wounded Union troops and an additional 8,000 Confederate prisoners. Confederates lost over 31 to 55 battle flags, with the Union possibly have lost slightly less than 40.
All right. The morning of July 4th, with Lee's army still present, Meade ordered his cavalry to get into the rear of Lee's army. In heavy rain, the army stared at one another across the bloody fields on the same day that, some 900 miles away, the Vicksburg garrison surrendered to Major General Ulysses S. Grant. Lee had reformed his lines into a defensive position on Seminary Ridge the night of July 3rd, evacuating the town of Gettysburg. Confederates remained on the battlefield's west side, hoping that Meade would attack, but the cautious Union commander decided against the risk, a decision for which he would later be criticized. Dude, there's 8,000 men on the field dead already.
Right.
Both armies began to collect the remaining wounded and bury some of the dead. A proposal by Lee for a prisoner exchange was rejected by Meade.
Oh, wow.
Said, nope.
Oh, you said you can keep my guys.
Right.
I'm keeping yours. Late in the rainy afternoon, Lee started moving the non-fighting portion of his army back to Virginia. Cavalry under Brigadier General John M. Bowden was entrusted to escort the 17-mile-long wagon train of supplies and wounded men using a long route through Cashtown and Greencastle to Williamsport, Maryland.
17 miles long, holy shit.
After sunset, the fighting portion of Lee's army began its retreat to Virginia, using a more direct but more mountainous route that began on the road to Fairfield. Although Lee knew exactly what he needed to do, Meade's situation was very different.
He needed to remain at Gettysburg until he was certain Lee was gone. If he left first, he could possibly leave an opening for Lee to get to Washington or Baltimore.
Right.
In addition, the army that left the battlefield first was often considered the defeated army. Now, if General Meade can complete his work so gloriously prosecuted thus far by the literal or substantial destruction of Lee's army, the rebellion will be over. Abraham Lincoln, 1863.
Man.
Nobody wants to ever pursue Lee, dude.
Right. It's like, let him go. Union cavalry had some minor successes pursuing Lee's army. The first major encounter took place in the mountains of Monterey Pass on the 4th of July, where Kilpatrick's cavalry division captured 150 to 300 wagons and took 1,300 to 1,500 prisoners. Beginning July 6th, additional cavalry fighting took place closer to the Potomac River in Maryland. This is Williamsport, Hagerstown area. Lee's army was trapped and delayed from crossing the Potomac River because rainy weather had caused the river to swell, and the pontoon bridge at Falling Waters had been destroyed. Meade's infantry did not fully pursue Lee until the 7th of July, and despite repeated pleas from Lincoln and Halleck, was not aggressive enough to destroy Lee's army.
A new pontoon bridge was constructed at Falling Waters, and lower water levels allowed the Confederates to begin crossing after dark on July 13th. They're just sitting by the riverbank for 5 days.
All right.
Although Meade's infantry had reached the area on July 12th, it was his cavalry that attacked the Confederate rearguard on the morning of July 14th. Union cavalry took 500 prisoners, and Confederate Brigadier General Pettigrew was mortally wounded, but Lee's army completed its Potomac crossing.
Right.
The campaign continued south of Potomac until the Battle of Manassas Gap, we'll have coming up, when Lee escapes Meade, and Meade abandons the pursuit. He said, I give up.
All right. What are you going to do? Wow. The news of the Union victory electrified the North. A headline in the Philadelphia Inquirer proclaimed, "Victory! Waterloo eclipsed." New York diarist George Templeton Strong wrote, "The results of this victory are priceless. The charm of Robert E. Lee's invincibility is broken. The Army of the Potomac has at last found a general that can handle it, and has stood nobly up to its terrible work in spite of its long, disheartening list of hard-fought failures. Copperheads are palsied and dumb for the moment at least. Government is strengthened fourfold at home and abroad." George Templeton Strong. His own diary, page 330.
Good for him. However, the Union enthusiasm soon dissipated as the public realized that Lee's army had escaped destruction and the war would continue. Lincoln complained to Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles that our army held the war in the hollow of their hand and they would not close it. Brigadier General Alexander Webb wrote to his father on July 17th, stating that such Washington politicians as Chase, Seward, and others, quote-unquote, disgusted with Meade. They write to me that Lee really won that battle, he says.
I mean, really can't take it as a loss for anybody, even though there was more casualties for Confederates, but still. But they still claim it as a Union victory.
Of course.
He should have done that 2 days earlier. In fact, the Confederates had lost militarily and also politically. During the final hours of the battle, Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens was approaching the Union lines at Norfolk, Virginia, under a flag of truce. Although his formal instructions, Confederate President Jefferson Davis had limited his powers to negotiate on prisoner exchanges and other procedural matters. Historian James M. McPherson speculates that he had informal goals of presenting peace overtures. President Davis had hoped that Stephens would reach Washington from the south, while Lee's victorious army was marching toward it from the north. Well, that would have worked out well.
Right. President Lincoln, upon hearing of the Gettysburg results, refused Stephens' request to pass through the lines. Furthermore, when the news reached London, any lingering hopes of European recognition of the Confederacy were finally abandoned. Henry Adams, whose father was serving as the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom at the time, wrote, "The disasters of the rebels are unredeemed by even any hope of success. It is now conceded that all idea of intervention is at an end." Ain't no Brits coming to help you guys.
They were thinking about it. They're strongly thinking about it. I think they even got people on ships and then decided to...
They're probably waiting. Yeah.
Right. Compounding the effects of the defeat was the end of the siege of Vicksburg, which surrendered to Grant's federal armies in West on 4th of July. The day after the Gettysburg Battle, costing the Confederacy an additional 30,000 men, along with their arms and stores. The immediate reaction of the Southern military and public sectors was that Gettysburg was a setback, not a disaster. The sentiment was that Lee had been successful on the 1st of July and had fought a valiant battle on the 2nd and 3rd, but could not dislodge the Union Army from the strong defensive position to which it fled. I mean, they did have a good little spot, the Unions did. And come on, you're walking across 300 yards of open field.
Right.
And that's a stupidity.
Well, the Confederates successfully stood their ground on July 4th and withdrew only after they realized Meade would not attack them.
I think the Vicksburg's in the Gettysburg movie, too. I'm not positive.
I'm sure some of it. The withdrawal to the Potomac that could have been a disaster was handled masterfully. Furthermore, the Army of the Potomac had been kept away from Virginia farmlands for the summer, and all predicted that Meade would be too timid to threaten them for the rest of the year. Lee himself had a positive view of the campaign, writing to his wife that the army had returned, quote-unquote, rather sooner than I had originally contemplated, but haven't accomplished what I proposed on leaving the Rappahannock, which is relieving the valley of the presence of the enemy and drawing his army north of the Potomac, which he did, yeah, I guess.
He was quoted as saying to Major John Seddon, brother of the Confederate Secretary of War, he says, "Sir, we did whip them at Gettysburg, and it will be seen for the next 6 months that army will be as quiet as a sucking dove." Some Southern publications, such as the Charleston Mercury, were very critical of Lee's actions. On 8th of August, Lee offered his resignation to President Davis, who quickly rejected it.
He's like, "Come on now, guys."
He's like, "Hold on, you just calm down, bud."
November 19th, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, considered one of the best-known speeches in American history. A crowd of citizens and soldiers surrounded him. The ravages of war were still evident in the Gettysburg more than 4 months later, when, November 19th, the Soldiers' National Cemetery was dedicated. During this ceremony, President Lincoln honored the fallen and redefined the purpose of the war in his historic Gettysburg Address.
Yep, it was a historic one, all right. There were 72 Medals of Honor awarded for the Gettysburg campaign, 64 of which for actions taken during the battle itself. The first recipient was awarded in December 1864, while the most recent was awarded to Lieutenant Alonzo Cushing in 2014. I hate when they do that 100 years later.
Right.
Does it matter?
Way more than 100 years later.
That doesn't matter now. The nature of
To their family, maybe?
I guess. The nature of the result of Battle of Gettysburg had been the subject of controversy, although not seen as overwhelmingly significant at the time, particularly since the war continued for almost 2 more years. In retrospect, it has often been cited as the turning point of the Civil War, usually in combination with the fall of Vicksburg the following day.
Right.
Yeah, if Vicksburg didn't fall the next day, I think it would not been that much of a deal.
This is based on the observation that after Gettysburg, Lee's army conducted no more strategic offensives. His army merely reacted to the initiative of Ulysses S. Grant in 1864 and 65, and by the speculative viewpoint of the Lost Cause writers that a Confederate victory at Gettysburg might have resulted in the end of the war.
Very possible, because they were not too far away from Washington after that.
The Army of the Potomac had won a victory. It might be less of a victory than Mr. Lincoln had hoped for, but it was nevertheless a victory. And because of that, it was no longer possible for the Confederacy to win the war. The North might still lose it, to be sure, if the soldiers or the people should lose heart, but outright defeat was no longer in the cards.
Right.
Bruce Catton, Glory Road.
Right. And basically, we got this. We just don't do no turnovers in the last 2 minutes.
Right.
We're good. It is currently a widely held view that Gettysburg was a decisive victory for the Union, but the term is considered imprecise. It is inarguable that Lee's offensive on the 3rd of July was turned back decisively and his campaign in Pennsylvania was terminated prematurely. Although the Confederates at the time argued that this was a temporary setback and that the goals of the campaign were largely met. However, when the more common definition of decisive victory is intended, an indisputable military victory of a battle that determines or significantly influences the ultimate result of a conflict, historians are there divided.
Well, for example, David J. Eicher called Gettysburg a strategic loss for the Confederacy, and James N. McPherson wrote that Lee and his men would go on to earn further laurels, but they never again possessed the power and reputation they carried into Pennsylvania those palmy summer days of 1863.
Right.
However, though, Herman Hathaway and Archer Jones wrote that the strategic impact of the Battle of Gettysburg was fairly limited. Stephen E. Woodworth wrote, Gettysburg proved only the near impossibility of decisive action in the Eastern Theater. Edwin Coddington pointed out the heavy toll on the Army of the Potomac and that after the battle, Meade no longer possessed a truly effective instrument for the accomplishments of his task.
That's true, too. If Lee had more men and he had more artillery, dude, I'm telling you, it's ridiculous. What they should have been doing is stocking up on Stuarts. They should have everybody on horses. Just go, baby, go. The Army needed a thorough reorganization with new commanders and fresh troops, but these changes were not made until Grant appeared on the scene in March of 1864. Joseph T. Glathar wrote, lost opportunities and near successes plagued the Army of Northern Virginia during its northern invasion. Yet, after Gettysburg, without the distractions of duty as invading force, without the breakdown in discipline, the Army of Northern Virginia remained an extremely formidable force.
Of course.
Ed Beers wrote, Lee's invasion of the North had been a costly failure. Nevertheless, the Army of the Potomac had simply preserved the strategic stalemate in the Eastern Theater.
All right. Well, historian Alan Guelzo notes that Gettysburg and Vicksburg did not end the war and that the war would go on for 2 more years. No shit.
No.
Hey, just so you guys know this.
There was more. Idiot.
He also noted that a little more than a year later, federal armies appeared hopelessly mired in sieges at Petersburg and Atlanta.
It's true.
Peter Carmichael refers to the military context for the armies. He says the horrendous losses at Chancellorsville and Gettysburg, which effectively destroyed Lee's offensive capacity. Okay, implying that these cumulative losses were not the result of a single battle.
Right.
Thomas Goss, writing in the U.S. Army's Military Review Journal on the definition of decisive and the application of that description to Gettysburg, concludes, for all that was decided and accomplished, the Battle of Gettysburg fails to earn the label decisive battle.
It doesn't. But if Stuart would have been there on the very first day.
If he wasn't been through the east on a horse with no name. Dude was just roaming.
And if Stonewall wouldn't have got murdered in the middle of the woods.
It's probably true.
Idiot. Military historian John Keegan agrees. Gettysburg was a landmark battle, the largest of the war, and it would not be surpassed. The Union had restored to its belief in certain victory, and the loss dispirited the Confederacy. If not exactly a decisive battle, Gettysburg was the end of the Confederate use of Northern Virginia as a military buffer zone. And it's true. And this became the setting for Grant's overland campaign.
Well, prior to Gettysburg, Robert E. Lee had established a reputation as an almost invincible general, achieving stunning victories against superior numbers, although usually at the cost of high casualties to his army. During the 7 days, the Northern Virginia campaign, Fredericksburg, and Chancellorsville. Only the Maryland campaign, with its tactically inconclusive Battle of Antietam, had been less than successful. Therefore, historians such as Fuller, Glathar, and Sears have attempted to explain how Lee's winning streak was interrupted so dramatically at Gettysburg.
Although the issue is tainted by attempts to portray history and Lee's reputation in a manner supporting different partisan goals, the major factors in Lee's loss arguably can be attributed to 1. His overconfidence and invincibility of his men, dos, the performance of his subordinates and his management thereof, 3. His failing health, oh, poor guy, and 4. The performance of his opponent, George G. Meade, and the Army of the Potomac. Well, don't give him so much credit there, because the Union there where they were set up was perfect for a defensive battle. That's why they didn't attack. I don't think the Union attacked at all, did they? Throughout the battle?
They had that one that failed with their cavalry.
Right, that's about it. And all the other ones were led by Confederates just getting mowed down while they're trying to cross 5 football fields. Throughout the campaign, Lee was influenced by the belief that his men were invincible. Most of Lee's experiences with the Army of Northern Virginia had convinced him of this, including the great victory at Chancellorsville in early May and the rout of the Union troops at Gettysburg on the 1st of July.
Come on, you're hanging on to that 1st of July there, bud.
Right.
Since morale plays an important role in military victory when other factors are equal, Lee did not want to dampen his army's desire to fight and resisted suggestions, principally by Longstreet, to withdraw from the recently captured Gettysburg to select a ground more favorable to his army. War correspondent Peter Alexander wrote that Lee acted probably under the impression that his troops were able to carry any position, however formidable. If such was the case, he committed an error. Such, however, as the ablest commanders will sometimes fall into. Lee himself concurred with this judgment, writing to President Davis, "No blame can be attached to the Army for its failure to accomplish what was projected by me, nor should it be censured for the unreasonable expectations of the public. I am alone to blame, and perhaps expecting too much of its prowess and valor."
True. I mean,
Why can't you just say I overestimated the Union?
well, not
pretty
even
much
that.
what happened there.
Not even that. I mean, he was a great Union general and knew what an army was. And the South were very terribly
Well, no.
terribly.
He already
trained.
has the reputation of taking on armies that were twice his size and
Right.
beating them, so he was like underestimated Union. Exactly what happened.
The most controversial assessments of the battle involved the performance of Lee's subordinates. The dominant theme of the lost cause writers and many other historians is that Lee's senior generals failed him in crucial ways, directly causing the loss of the battle. The alternative viewpoint is that Lee did not manage his subordinates adequately and did not thereby compensate for their shortcomings. Because he gave so much lenience to his guys, dude. He didn't follow up on what they were doing. 2 of his corps commanders,
That's what they're there for.
Richard Ewell and A.P. Hill, had only recently been promoted and were not fully accustomed to Lee's style of command, which was, hey, bud, I'm going to give you an order and expect you to do it.
Right.
In which provided only general objectives and guidance to their former commander, right, Stonewall Jackson. But Jackson already knew Lee and how to run shit.
Right. Lee would just say, "Hey, man, we need to go here and take these guys," and then Jackson would be the one that come up to how to do it, pretty much.
Jackson translated these into detailed, specific orders to his division commanders, though.
Right.
Right, and so these guys didn't get that after that.
All 4 of Lee's principal commanders received criticism during the campaign and battle. Longstreet suffered most severely from the wrath of the Lost Cause authors, not the least, because he directly criticized Lee in postbellum writings and became a Republican after the war. Oh, really? His critics accuse him of attacking much later than Lee intended on July 2nd, squandering a chance to hit the Union Army before its defensive positions had firmed up. They also question his lack of motivation to attack strongly on July 2nd and 3rd because he had argued that the Army should have maneuvered to a place where it would force Meade to attack them.
Yes, well, he was right.
The alternative view is that Lee was in close contact with Longstreet during the battle, agreed to delays on the morning of July 2nd, and never criticized Longstreet's performance. There is also considerable speculation that what an attack might have looked like before Dan Sickles moved the 3rd Corps toward the Peach Orchard. Right.
Jeb Stuart deprived Lee of cavalry intelligence during a good part of the campaign by taking his 3 best brigades on a path away from the armies. No, because that's what Lee told him to do.
And he wanted to. And Lee agreed.
Right. This arguably led to Lee's surprise at Hooker's vigorous pursuit. The engagement on the July 1st escalated into the full battle prematurely, and it also prevented Lee from understanding the full disposition of the enemy on the 2nd of July. The disagreements regarding Stuart's culpability for the situation originate in the relatively vague orders issued by Lee, but most modern historians agree that both generals were responsible to some extent for the failure of the cavalry's mission early in the campaign.
Yeah, they both suck.
Right.
Richard Ewell has been universally criticized for failing to seize the high ground on the afternoon of the 1st of July. Once again, the disagreement centers on Lee's orders, which provided general guidance for Ewell to act if practicable. Many historians speculate that Stonewall Jackson, if he had survived Chancellorsville, would have aggressively seized Culp's Hill, rendering Cemetery Hill indefensible and changing the entire complexion of the battle.
I think so.
A differently worded order from Lee might have made the difference with the subordinate. Right, that's Lee's fault too.
Right.
Can't just be, not everybody's Stonewall.
Right.
Some people need a clear freaking explanation.
And Lee was always like that. A.P. Hill has received some criticism for his ineffective performance. His action caused the battle to begin and then escalate on July 1st, despite Lee's orders not to bring on a general engagement, although historians point out that Hill kept Lee well informed of his actions during the day. However, Hill's illness minimized his personal involvement in the remainder of the battle, and Lee took the explicit step of temporarily removing troops from Hill's corps and giving them to Longstreet for Pickett's charge.
In addition to Hill's illness, Lee's performance was affected by heart troubles, which would eventually lead to his death in 1870. Oh, poor guy. Yeah. He had been diagnosed with pericarditis by his staff physicians in March of 1863, though modern doctors believe he had, in fact, suffered a heart attack.
Probably.
As a final factor, Lee faced a new and formidable opponent in George Meade, and the Army of Potomac fought well on its home territory. Although new to his Army command, Meade deployed his forces relatively effectively, relied on strong subordinates such as Winfield Hancock to make decisions where and when they were needed, took great advantage of defensive positions, nimbly shifted defensive resources on interior lines to parry strong threats, and, unlike some of his predecessors, stood his ground throughout the battle in the face of fierce Confederate attacks.
It's true. Most of them just
all
like,
of them, what's his name?
Hood and
McClellan and they would just like, we gotta go.
Lee was quoted before the battle as saying, Meade would commit no blunders on my front, and if I make one, will make a haste to take advantage of it. He knew. That prediction proved to be correct at Gettysburg. Stephen Sears wrote, the fact of the matter is that George Meade, unexpectedly and against all odds, thoroughly outgeneraled Robert E. Lee at Gettysburg. Because Lee was used to everybody just running off, like he said. And that didn't happen. Edwin B. Coddington wrote that the soldiers of the Army of Potomac received a sense of triumph which grew into an imperishable faith in themselves. The men knew what they could do under an extremely competent general. One of the lesser ability and courage could well have lost the battle. Yes, and if it would have been McClellan or something. Hooker, yeah.
Meade had his own detractors as well, though. Similar to the situation with Lee, Meade suffered partisan attacks about his performance at Gettysburg, but he had the misfortune of experiencing them in person. Supporters of his predecessor, Hooker, lambasted Meade before the U.S. Congress's Joint Committee on the Conduct of War, where radical Republicans suspected that Meade was a copperhead and tried in vain to relieve him from command. Daniel Sickles and Daniel Butterfield accused Meade of planning to retreat from Gettysburg during the battle. Most politicians, including Lincoln, criticized Meade for what they considered to be his half-hearted pursuit of Lee after. Well, they all do that.
Right. They're like, you come out here and run after this guy.
A number of Meade's most competent subordinates, Winfield Hancock, John Gibbon, Gouverneur Warren, and Henry Hunt, all heroes of the battle, defended Meade in print, but Meade was embittered by the overall experience.
Yeah.
That's because the North is a bunch of idiots.
Yeah.
All their politicians, they're all idiots.
And Meade is far the best general until Grant. Actually, Meade was far better than Grant.
Well, maybe. Grant, what did he do?
Exactly. And he's probably one of the worst.
He came in at the right time when the South was already pretty much gone.
Everybody thinks he's so great, and he's one of the worst presidents ever. Terrible.
I don't think he was.
He was a terrible president.
Generally, neither here nor there on him.
Gettysburg National Cemetery and Gettysburg National Military Park are maintained by the U.S. National Park Services as two of the nation's most revered historical landmarks. Although Gettysburg is one of the best known of the Civil War battlefields, it too faces threats to its preservation and interpretation. Why? Leave it alone, people. Morons. Many historically significant locations on the battlefield lie outside the boundaries of Gettysburg National Military Park and are vulnerable to residential or commercial development.
So why don't you extend the National Military Park?
Some preservation successes have emerged in recent years, though. Two proposals to open a casino at Gettysburg were defeated in 2006 and most recently again in 2011. when public pressure forced the Pennsylvania Game and Control Board to reject the proposed gambling hub at the intersection of Routes 15 and 30 near East Cavalry Field.
What a bunch of dirty sons of
I know,
bitches,
right?
dude. Let's put a casino here.
Idiots.
The American Battlefield Trusts also successfully purchased and transferred 95 acres at the former site of the Gettysburg Country Club to the control of the U.S. Department of the Interior in 2011. Less than half of the over 11,500 acres on the old Gettysburg battlefield have been preserved for posterity thus far. Nice. American Battlefield Trust and its partners, who are these partners,
Right.
have acquired and preserved 1,242 acres of the battlefield in more than 40 separate transactions since 1997. Some of these acres are now among the 4,998 acres, just put two more,
Right.
of the National Military Park of Gettysburg. I mean,
Fantastic. 2015, the trust made one of its most important and expensive acquisitions, paying $60 million for a 4-acre parcel that included the stone house that Confederate General Robert E. Lee used as his headquarters during the battle. I mean, I guess. The trust raised...
how is it that 150 years later they still don't have that?
I know, right? Well, the trust raised a motel, restaurant, and other buildings within the parcel to restore Lee's headquarters and the site to where they were to their wartime appearance. Fantastic. Adding interpretive signs. Hey. It opened the site to the public in October of 2016. Fantastic.
At the 50th anniversary Gettysburg reunion in 1913, 50,000 veterans attended according to a 1938 Army medical report. Historian Carol Reardon writes that attendance included at least 35,000 Union veterans, and though estimates of attendees ran as high as 56,000, only a few more than 7,000 were Confederates, mostly from Virginia and North Carolina. Some veterans reenacted Pickett's charge in a spirit of reconciliation, a meeting that carried great emotional force for both sides, I imagine. There was a ceremonial mass handshake across a stone wall on Cemetery Ridge. Nice.
Dude, can you imagine being the actual fighters and reenacting the battle?
Right.
Oh, my.
They just start killing each other for real.
At the 75th anniversary of Gettysburg in 1938, 1,333 Union veterans and 479 Confederate veterans attended.
Damn, dude, look at that. 25 years and they're almost all gone.
Film records survive of 2 Gettysburg reunions held on the battlefield. The Battle of Gettysburg was depicted in 1993 film Gettysburg, based on Michael Shara's 1975 novel The Killer Angels. The film and the novel focus primarily on the actions of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, John Buford, and Robert E. Lee, and James Longstreet during the battle. They did.
All right, there you go. That's going to do it for the largest battle
Stupidity.
of the war.
Stupidity. Let's walk across 3 football fields while there's 15,000 guys pointing guns at us.
More than about 15.
Ridiculous. And then have to climb a fence. So you basically stopped right there. It's like trying to get out of a crowded movie theater with one exit. It's dumb. Wow. That was the stupidest thing in the world. Whoever. Oh, wow.
Whoever.
Right. Battle of Fairfield. It was a cavalry engagement. It was during the Gettysburg campaign. Happened on the 3rd of July in 1863 near Fairfield, Pennsylvania, concurrently with the Battle of Gettysburg, although it was not a formal part of this battle. Fairfield had been the site of combat on the 21st of June when the 14th Virginia Cavalry of Brigadier General Albert Jenkins' Mounted Infantry Brigade had used Monterey Pass to conduct a raid near Fairfield. Following an engagement with the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry, the Confederates withdrew into the Cumberland Valley. I think we did that, didn't we? Monterey Pass, I remember that.
Well, maybe.
Much of that cavalry of the Army of Northern Virginia had accompanied Major General Jeb Stuart on his ride around the Union Army of the Potomac through Maryland and south central Pennsylvania. Lee had retained several brigades to guard the mountain passes as he advanced through the Shenandoah and Cumberland valleys and to scout federal positions. Among the latter brigades was that of Brigadier General William E. Grumble Jones, who was the celebrated Laurel Brigade that had once been commanded by Turner Ashby. Jones had detached one of his best commands, which is the 35th Battalion of Virginia Cavalry, to accompany the infantry of Jubal Early, but retained the bulk of his command. Jones's brigade had been raiding the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in West Virginia and Maryland before being recalled by Lee.
Okay, gotta get those railroads. They hastened to Pennsylvania, crossing the Potomac River on the 1st of July, where Jones detached the 12th Virginia Cavalry to guard the ford. And then they camped at Chambersburg the following night. Jones's force had been reduced to the 6th, 7th, and 11th Virginia Cavalry and Preston's Chew's battery of horse artillery. Horse artillery, huh? Wonder what that is.
Probably horses pulling guns.
Jones reached Fairfield on the 3rd of July in response to Lee's orders to secure the vital Hagerstown Road. Reports of a slow-moving Confederate wagon train in the vicinity had attracted the attention of newly commissioned Union Brigadier General Wesley Merritt, who ordered the 6th U.S. Cavalry under Major Samuel Starr.
I wonder if that is Saul Starr's descendant.
Possible. He said, "Hey, yo, Major Starr, go scout Fairfield and locate those wagons for me, bud." He said, "I will get on it." Once in Fairfield, Major Starr learned that a wagon train had just rolled out of town and was heading to Cashtown.
Hey.
He divided his 400 men into 3 detachments and began the search for the wagons.
One party soon encountered the pickets of Jones's 7th Virginia Cavalry and withdrew when additional Confederates rode up. They're like, oh, shit. Informed of the presence of the enemy, Starr rode to a small ridge and dismounted his men in fields and an orchard on both sides of the road.
Oh, shit.
He threw back a mounted charge of the 7th Virginia just as Chew's battery unlimbered and opened fire on the Federal cavalrymen. Supported by the 6th Virginia and the 7th Virginia, supported by the 6th Virginia, the 7th Virginia charged again, clearing Starr's force off the ridge and inflicting heavy losses.
Oh, Starr, what are you doing, bud?
Jones pursued the retreating Federals for 3 miles to the Fairfield Gap, but was unable to catch his quarry.
How not?
Right.
Federal losses were 6 moited, 28 wounded, 208 unaccounted for, which were mostly prisoners.
Yeah, whatever. They probably left them anyways. Like,
Right.
Screw you, Confederates.
The losses for the Confederates were 8 killed, 21 wounded, and 5 missing. Jones camped near Fairfield and kept the road open for Lee's retreat, then guided the rear of the Army of Northern Virginia, slogged through the Fairfield Gap in a driving rainstorm on the 5th of July.
After they're already retreating.
After they're already hanging their heads low. Private George Platt, an Irish immigrant, serving in Troop H of the 6th U.S. Cavalry. He was awarded the Medal of Honor on the 12th of July in 1895 for his actions at Fairfield. His citation reads, "Seized the regimental flag upon the death of the standard bearer in a hand-to-hand fight and prevented it from falling into the hands of the enemy."
Good for him, huh?
Hey,
He
man,
said,
the
"You ain't
flag-
taking my flag."
The flag was a major thing.
Yeah. His commander was Lieutenant Lewis H. Carpenter, who was awarded the Medal of Honor in the Indian Wars. After fighting ended, many wounded soldiers were cared for in the town of Fairfield. Major Samuel Starr was taken to the widow Sarah Amanda Blythe's house, which is likely where his arm was amputated. Ooh. Other accounts mention that the Rufus C. Swope house, which was across the Fairfield Inn, and St. John's Lutheran Church were also used as hospitals.
I'm
It
sure.
is probable that other buildings in town were used for this purpose as well.
Wherever anybody landed, that's where they were used. I wonder if old Starr got it with the widow. That's usually how it happened back in the day. Some man rose into town needing his arm chopped off.
The widow, Sarah Blythe, huh? Doesn't say if he was married at all.
He had a daughter, though.
All right. It's going to lead us to the fight at Monterey Pass or Monterey Gap, whatever you prefer, on the evening and early morning hours of July 4th through the 5th. While other Confederates are retreating through Fairfield, there's another one retreating through the Cashtown Gap and the Monterey Pass. The wagons headed for the Monterey Pass followed the route of Major General George Pickett's division, which was moving to the rear as escorts for the Union prisoners of war from the battle. Early on the 4th, Meade sent his cavalry to strike the enemy's rear and lines of communication so as to harass and annoy him as much as possible in his retreat. 8 cavalry brigades took the field. Colonel J. Irving Gregg's brigade moved towards Cashtown via Hunterstown and the Mummasburg Road, but all the others moved south of Gettysburg. Brigadier General Judson Kilpatrick's cavalry division joined up with the brigade of Colonel Pennock Huey at Emmitsburg, Maryland, and they were ordered to locate and destroy a heavy train of wagons that had been spotted by a Union signal station. Assuming that Ewell's Corps wagon train was actually the main supply train for Lee's army, Kilpatrick moved out aggressively at 10 a.m. July 4th, proceeding west on the Waynesboro-Emmitsburg Turnpike toward the village of Fountaindale. Old Jeb Stuart, he understood the importance of securing the mountain passes, and he assigned the primary responsibility to the cavalry brigades of Brigadier Generals Beverly Robertson and William Grumble Jones. Recognizing the vulnerability of Ewell's immense wagon train in the narrow Monterey Pass, Jones asked permission from Stuart to use his entire brigade to defend it. Stuart, he allowed the 6th and 7th Virginia Cavalry regiments and a battery of horse artillery under Captain Roger Preston Chew to be assigned. 7th Virginia was soon recalled, replaced by the 4th North Carolina Cavalry of Robertson's brigade. Brigadier General George Custer received intelligence from a local civilian that the rear of Ewell's wagon train was approaching a large summer resort hotel named Monterey Springs, which sat atop the pass. Despite being warned of a Confederate artillery replacement ahead, Kilpatrick orders his entire force to advance. A single 12-pounder Napoleon of Courtney's battery, they fired a shot at the Union horsemen, but the gunners withdrew before they could be attacked. The remaining Confederate force on top of the road up the hill to the pass consisted of a detachment of 20 dismounted cavalrymen under Captain George E. Mack from the 1st Maryland Cavalry Battalion, along with a single cannon. As Union troopers from the 5th Michigan approached Emick's men, the cannon opened fire and 8 of the Marylanders conducted a mounted charge into the head of the Union column. In the dark and heavy rain, the Union cavalrymen were taken by surprise and many of them retreated in panic. The Confederate cavalrymen dismounted, took up positions on both sides of the road. When the Federals returned, Emack's men waited impatiently until they were about 10 yards away and opened fire. The Union cavalrymen were convinced they were opposed by a much larger force. While this standoff continued, Ewell's wagons were moving as swiftly as possible to get out of the range of the Union cavalry threat. By the time Grumble Jones was able to make his way to the scene through the crowded roads, the small Maryland detachment had been driven back several hundred yards, almost to the road junction being used by the wagon train. By this time, less than half of the train had made it safely through the pass. Jones, he promised reinforcements from the 6th Virginia Cavalry, and Emack ordered his men to hold their ground and conserve their ammo. Meanwhile, elements of Jones's cavalry attacked Huey's brigade in the rear of Kilpatrick's column. Kilpatrick then brought forward 2 guns of horse artillery from Alexander Pennington's Battery M 2nd U.S. Artillery, which was supported by men of the 1st Ohio Cavalry. South of the hotel, a bridge on the road had not been destroyed by the Confederates, and Colonel Russer Alger of the 5th Michigan Cavalry requested reinforcements to make a mounted charge across the bridge. Kilpatrick ordered Custer to make the attack with his full Michigan brigade. The advance of the 5th and 6th Michigan Cavalry regiments was slowed by the darkness, difficult terrain, and dense undergrowth. A tiny group of Marylanders, supported by a few cavalry from the 4th North Carolina of Robertson's brigade, they had delayed the Union advance for nearly 5 hours. About 3 p.m. or a.m., July 5th, as the Michigan Brigade continued to move slowly forward, Kilpatrick sent in the 1st West Virginia Cavalry under Major Charles Capehart. Capehart's 640 officers and men charged what they imagined to be 5 times their numbers. In hand-to-hand fighting with sabers and revolvers, they seized the Confederate cannon, and Capehart was later awarded the Medal of Honor for his gallant service. The road was then opened to attack the wagon train, which the Union cavalrymen did. They crashed into the column of now lightly protected wagons. Custer, in his enthusiasm for the charge, was thrown from his horse and nearly captured. Grumble Jones also narrowly avoided capture himself. Pennington's artillery began shelling the wagons toward the rear of the column, splintering carriages and blocking any opportunity for a retreat. The Union and Confederate cavalrymen became thoroughly mixed up among the wagons, and the enemies were unable to differentiate themselves in the darkness. Several friendly fire incidents occurred as Union troopers accidentally fired on their own lines. Union troopers rode all the way through the wagon train until they reached Ewell's infantry and captured large number of prisoners before returning to repeat the effort. They erected hasty barricades in front of the wagon train to protect what they had captured. More than 1,300 Confederates, which were primarily wounded men in ambulances, but also slaves, free blacks, and some cavalrymen, they were all captured and most of the wagons destroyed. Many of the mules survived and were turned over to the Cavalry Corps quartermaster. Kilpatrick later reported that he had destroyed Ewell's entire wagon train, although he had in fact encountered only a fraction of the full 40-mile-long train. The Confederates lost about 250 wagons, though, and ambulances, with casualties from Iverson's and Daniel's brigades and of 3 artillery battalions, as well as 37 wagons from Major General Robert Rhodes's division quartermaster trains. Following the fight at the pass, Kilpatrick's division reached Smithsburg around 2 p.m. July 5th. Arrived from over South Mountain with the brigades of Chambers and Ferguson, and that's where our next battle of Boonesboro takes place. And we'll get to Boonesboro, Funkstown, Williamsport, and all that other good stuff coming up after this. The history of the Monterey Pass battle is commemorated by the Monterey Pass Battlefield Park and Museum, which opened in 2015. Multiple historical markers are present near the site, including a Pennsylvania marker, which was installed in 1940, and a Michigan historical marker dedicated at the museum's opening. The Michigan historical marker is one of 8 located outside of the state of Michigan. Oh, well. A 40-minute documentary on the battle entitled 10 Days and Still They Come, The Battle at Monterey Pass, That was released in 2011. Don't know where, though. You have to research it. Or you can just listen right here. So, yep, that's Monterey Pass. Coming up next, we'll have the Battle of Williamsport as these old Confederates continue to retreat. But the Battle of Williamsport, also known as the Battle of Hagerstown or Fallen Waters, took place from July 6th to July 16th, 1863, in Washington County, Maryland, as part of that Gettysburg campaign. During the night of the 4th, morning of July 5th, General Robert E. Lee's battered Confederate Army begins its retreat from Gettysburg, moving southwest on the Fairfield Road toward Hagerstown and Williamsport, screened by Jeb and his cavalry. The Union infantry followed cautiously the next day, converging on Middletown, Maryland. July 7th, Brigadier General John D. Bowden stopped Brigadier General John Buford's Union cavalry from occupying Williamsport and destroying Confederate trains.
Oh.
On July 6th, Brigadier General Judson Kilpatrick's cavalry drove 2 Confederate cavalry brigades through Hagerstown before being forced to retire by the arrival of the rest of Stuart's command. Lee's infantry reached the rain-swollen Potomac River but could not cross, the pontoon bridge having been destroyed by a cavalry raid.
Uh-oh.
Got to build another one.
July 11th, 1863. General Lee entrenched in a line protecting the river crossings at Williamsport and waited for Major General George Meade's Army of the Potomac to advance. July 12th, Meade reached the vicinity and probed the Confederate line. 13th of July, skirmishing was heavy along the lines as Meade positioned his forces for an attack. In the meantime, the river fell enough to allow the construction of a new bridge, and General Lee's army began crossing the river after dark on the 13th. Look at the hell out of here! Morning of 14th of July, 1863, Kilpatrick and Buford's cavalry divisions approached from the north and east, respectively. Before allowing Buford to gain a position on the flank and rear, Kilpatrick attacked the rear guard division of Major General Henry Heth, taking more than 500 prisoners. Heath?
Yeah, we were saying Heth the one episode, and then I watched
Heath.
I watched Gettysburg, and it's definitely Heath.
General Henry Heath, taking more than 500 prisoners. Confederate Brigadier General Johnston Pettigrew was mortally wounded in the fight.
Pettigrew. Oh, yeah, that's the one that we discussed in the Gettysburg episode. Right. July 16th, Brigadier General David Gregg's cavalry approached Shepherdstown, where the brigades of Brigadier Generals Fitzhugh Lee and John R. Chambliss, supported by Colonel Milton F. Ferguson's brigade, held the Potomac River fords against the Union infantry.
Uh-oh.
Fitzhugh Lee and Chambliss attacked Gregg, who held out against several attacks and sorties, fighting sporadically until nightfall when he withdrew. The American Battlefield Trust and its partners I would like to know who these partners are, guys.
Right.
They've preserved 3.5 acres of the battlefield at Williamsport through mid-2023.
Fantastic.
All right.
All right. Moving on to the Battle of Boonesboro. July 8th, 1863 is that when that took place, Washington County, Maryland, as part of the retreat from Gettysburg during the Gettysburg campaign. Confederate Major General Jeb Stuart faced a difficult assignment. Locate the Union cavalry and prevent it from severing General Lee's avenue of retreat to Williamsport and the Potomac River.
This dude Jeb is just always searching for something.
The result was the biggest and most sustained cavalry battle in Maryland during this campaign. The Battle of Boonesboro occurred along the National Road on Wednesday, July 8th, 1863.
All right. Stuart, with 5 cavalry brigades, advanced from the direction of Funkstown and Williamsport. He first encountered Federal resistance at Beaver Creek Bridge, 4.5 miles north of Boonesboro. By 11 a.m., the Confederate cavalry had pushed forward to several mud-soaked fields where fighting on horseback was nearly impossible, forcing Stuart's troopers and Brigadier Generals H. Judson Kilpatrick's and John Buford's Union cavalry divisions to dismount and slug it out like infantry.
Oh.
By mid-afternoon, the Union left under Kilpatrick crumbled as the Federals ran low on ammo under increasing Confederate pressure. Stuart's advance ended about 7 p.m., however, when Union infantry arrived, the first to engage in battle since Gettysburg.
They're like, we'll fight your cavalrymen on the ground, but not touching those infantries.
Stuart withdrew north to Funkstown, but he had gained another day for Lee's retreating army.
Damn right he did.
2 days later, he would again delay the Federal pursuit at the Battle of Funkstown.
Fantastic. Look at that. Second Battle of Funkstown, more commonly simply referred to as the Battle of Funkstown. It took place near Funkstown, Maryland on the 10th of July, 1863, during the Gettysburg campaign. Union forces of the Army of Potomac attacked the rear guard of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, during its retreat from Pennsylvania following the Battle of Gettysburg. A strong Confederate presence at Funkstown threatened any Union advance against General Robert E. Lee's position near Williamsport and the Potomac River. As he retreated to Virginia after the Battle of Gettysburg, Lee was running with his tails between his legs. Major General Jeb Stuart's cavalry posted at Funkstown posed a serious risk to the Federal right and the rear if the Union Army lunged west from Boonesboro. Stuart, meanwhile, determined to wage a spirited defense to ensure Lee time to complete fortifications protecting his army and his avenue of retreat. Oh, Stuart, man. If it wasn't for Stuart, Lee would have been dead.
Maybe. Captured.
All right.
As Brigadier General John Buford's Federal Cavalry Division cautiously approached Funkstown via the National Road on Friday morning, July 10th, it encountered Stuart's crescent-shaped 3-mile-long battle line. It was Stuart's first defensive battle since re-entering Maryland. Of course, the high ground constituted Stuart's extreme right, held by Preston Chew's horse artillery. Damn, horse artillery, huh? A nearby stone barn and barnyard wall proved a superb defensive position for the 34th Virginia Battalion's dismounted cavalry. Colonel Thomas C. Devon's dismounted Union Cavalry Brigade attacked about 8 a.m. By mid-afternoon, with Buford's cavalrymen running low on ammo and gaining little ground, Colonel Lewis A. Grant's 1st Vermont Brigade of Infantry arrived and jabbed at the Confederate center less than 1 mile away.
Oh, shit. Right. Unbeknownst to the Vermonters, General George Anderson's Confederate Brigade now faced them. The first time opposing infantry had clashed since the Battle of Gettysburg.
Dude, it was only 3 days ago.
Right.
You're going to have to,
Right.
It's a milestone.
By early evening, the Union Army began withdrawing south towards Beaver Creek, where the Union 1st, 6th, and 11th Corps had concentrated. Stuart had kept the Federals at bay for yet another day. The day-long battle east of the road resulted in 479 casualties. The Cheney House served as a hospital. At the Keller home, Confederate Major Henry McDaniel, later the governor of Georgia, survived his wounds.
Dude, how are these Confederates getting elected governors and shit afterwards?
He would spend the rest of the war in a Union prisoner of war camp. Nice. He's a pal.
He's a pal, Mia. Pal, Mia.
All right. A smaller engagement took place near Funkstown on the 7th of July, 3 days prior to the Battle of Funkstown.
Okay.
All right.
Should you have led with that instead of ending? Jeez.
Battle of Manassas Gap, also known as the Battle of Wapping Heights, wet-ass pussies in the heights, took place July 23rd, 1863 in Warren County, Virginia, at the conclusion of Robert E. Lee's retreat back to Virginia in the final days of the Gettysburg campaign. Following a defeat at the Battle of Gettysburg, Lee's Confederate Army of Northern Virginia retreated across the Potomac at Williamsport, Maryland, and withdrew into the Shenandoah Valley. Major General George G. Meade's Army of the Potomac, in pursuit of his army, decided to try to flank the Confederate Army by crossing the river east of the Blue Ridge Mountains at Harper's Ferry and Berlin, Maryland, into Loudon Valley, and then forcing a passage across the Blue Ridge in Lee's rear. To this end, on July 23rd, Meade ordered the 3rd Corps under Major General William H. French to cut off the retreating Confederate columns at Front Royal, Virginia, by forcing passage through the Manassas Gap.
Oh, shit. This dude got a plan. At dawn, French began his attack with New York Escalisior Brigade, led by, what the, Excelsior? Excelsior.
Sure.
At dawn, French began his attack.
Hey, I'm walking here.
At
That
dawn,
is New York, I guess.
yeah, at dawn, French began his attack with the New York Escalisior Brigade. He was led by Brigadier General Francis
Hey,
B.
Spanola.
And he was fighting against Brigadier General Ambrose Wright's brigade of the Georgians under the command of Colonel Edward J. Walker of the 3rd Georgia Regiment, and they were defending the pass. The fight was slow at first, with the superior Union first using its numbers to push Walker from his defensive position back through the gap. In late afternoon, around 4:30 p.m., French made a concerted assault on Walker's brigade, driving them from the gap. Out in the open, right?
The Confederates were quickly reinforced by Colonel Edward Asbury O'Neill's brigade and artillery of Colonel Thomas Henry Carter, which stalled the Union advance. By dusk, the Union attack became uncoordinated and was abandoned. During the night, Confederate forces withdrew into the Luray Valley, and on July 24th, the Union Army occupied Front Royal, but Lee's army was safely beyond pursuit.
Oh, shit. The small fight was inconclusive. The Union Army was able to successfully gain passage through the gap in the Blue Ridge and occupy Front Royal, but not before Lee was able to withdraw further up the valley to safety. By failing to cut off the Confederate retreat and bring Lee into battle, the Army of Northern Virginia was allowed to reorganize and regroup. By the end of the summer, both armies had taken their familiar positions opposite the Rappahannock and the Rapidan rivers, setting the stage for the Bristow and Mine Run campaigns in the fall.
Yes, sir.
So there was no battle here at all.
Skirmish.
Right?
Right.